Chapter 943. The series of thunder clashing in the sky spread out for tens of thousands of miles. It lasted for a full 15 minutes before it gradually disappeared. Even then, the entire area was still filled with the echoes. This was just the two of them casually using it to test the waters. If they went all out, who knows what kind of commotion it would cause. Zhang Yan's eyes squinted. Although the opponent was reacting, he could see that he didn't use much essence energy and spiritual power. It was obvious that he understood the mysteries of the purple cloud god lightning, which was why he was able to deal with it so calmly. But since that was the case, then he wouldn't use the Qinsong ability. With another wave of his hand, the yellow smoke in the sky swept over and instantly condensed into an enormous hand that could hold up the heavens, and it pressed down from above. Before it even arrived below, a violent flow of air blasted apart the strong clouds, and it seemed as if it intended to shatter this area of the heavens and the earth. In the middle pillar continent below, Elder Shui stroked his beard and closed his eyes to sense the situation. At this moment, excitement flashed across his face. Zhenren Zhang seems to be using a vicious move. Then he sighed. Unfortunately, I can't go up and see it for myself. Ing Chuanxiu saw that he forgot to protect the continent beneath him and shook his head. He knew that he couldn't count on this fellow sect member. He took out a small cauldron from his sleeve, opened the lid, and shook it in his palm. Instantly, it emitted countless wisps of smoke that gathered up the remnant strong clouds in the sky. Then, it formed a thick and solid curtain that supported the sky. Only then was it able to barely isolate the wind pressure and cloud flow outside. Zhang Yan looked down. Such a direct ability was even more powerful now that he was using it at the image phase realm. One palm was enough to shatter the continent. It wasn't an exaggeration. Logically speaking, unless the opponent could dodge, he could only take it head-on. However, he judged that this was the first time the two of them clashed head-on. With the opponent's stubborn personality, there was a high chance that he wouldn't dodge. Which was why he wanted to see how he would deal with it. Yan Changsheng looked up at the giant hand. His eyes shone brighter and brighter as he hollered. He said, "Good." He pointed with two fingers. A green light flashed. At first, it was just a foot long, but after a breath, it shone with endless light. It almost blocked out the radiance of the sun and moon. Wherever he went, regardless of whether it was the astral wind sand or the poisonous fire intense qi, they all disappeared without a trace. The green light continued to soar into the sky. As soon as they collided with the Xianhuang hand, the world first darkened before it brightened. This was a flash and then a flash. Without a sound, both of them disappeared without a trace. When one looked over, there was only a clear sky. Zhang Yan couldn't help but raise his brows and thought to himself, could it be that divine art? It seems like perfected Master Yan has many tricks up his sleeves. Although he had never seen this divine ability, he had seen it in the records of the Duzhen Palace. This was created by a Dongtian Zhenren named Yu Liangshan. This Zhenren was also one of the 12 Dongtian Zhenrens who went on an expedition to the northern underworld. His Dharma form was called the Hidden Jade Green Essence by the people of that time. Just like the name of the Dharma form, once it was used, it could cleanse the impurities, eliminate the external qi, and calm the spiritual vigor. Naturally, this technique consumed a lot of vitality and mana. If one side used it a few times, the opponent would not even need to attack and would be worn down. Zhang Yan also understood this principle. Therefore, he did not hesitate and waved his hand again. Yellow smoke rose and condensed into a giant hand that covered the sky. It slapped down again. Yan Changsheng snorted and was about to make a move. At this moment, a painting with a faint aura of treasure flew out from his sleeve and took the initiative to meet the attack. When he saw it, he was instantly displeased and shouted, "Yan Changsheng am fighting. Do you think I need you to interfere?" The spiritual light trembled and turned into an old man with a cane with a face full of wrinkles. With a look of respect, he cupped his hands together and smiled bitterly. "I, perfected master, am being presumptuous. Please don't blame me." Yan Changsheng did not care about him. He shook his hand and kept it back into his sleeve. Then he made a gesture and in the sky, two sharp spiritual shuttles flew out of nowhere. There were a total of 12 shuttles. They turned into golden light and shot towards the giant hand. In the blink of an eye, they landed on the giant hand. Then, they weaved back and forth like they were weaving a web. For a moment, the sky was filled with golden light. But the giant hand continued to fall, as if it was not restrained at all. Yan Changxing only looked up coldly. His clothes and beard fluttered in the wind. Even though the giant hand was about to fall, his body did not move. With a boom, under the entanglement of the golden light, the giant hand finally exploded less than a mile away from him. The 12 divine shuttles paused in the sky for a moment before disappearing into the void. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed when he saw this scene. If one only cultivated the second half of the divine cave spirit scripture, then there would be a flaw. The cultivator needed to constantly sense the opponent in order to find out the opponent's strength. However, this would also consume mana. If the battle dragged on, the cultivator would be exhausted and the opponent would easily take advantage of it. But after cultivating the first and second half together, it was different. Every spiritual shuttle was like the cultivator's eyes and ears. Wherever they went, they could detect the opponent's strength. According to the sect's records, every time Yan Changxing attacked, he would first set up the spiritual shuttles to detect the enemy's energy. Therefore, to defeat the enemy, one must first destroy the spiritual shuttles. Zhang Yan had the same plan before. But looking at it now, it was obvious that he had reached a higher level in this path. He was able to hide the spiritual shuttles in the void and hide their traces. Therefore, the original plan couldn't be used. Luckily, he had thought about this and was prepared. But there was one thing that he didn't understand. Not only could the spiritual shuttles detect energy, they could also be used to attack the enemy. If it was him, he would definitely hide it in the dark and wait for an opportunity to attack. That way, he would be able to obtain miraculous results. Now that it was exposed, it was obvious that he was one step ahead of the others to be on guard. After thinking about it again, he understood. This should be because the opponent didn't have enough spiritual energy. If he used supernatural methods, it would consume a lot of energy. Therefore, he had no choice but to use this method in advance. The real treasure that just now showed up should know the reason and came up to cover it. In the end, he was ordered to retreat. Thinking about this, his eyes were dim. If Yan Changxing was at his peak, it wouldn't have been so easy. It seemed that the sword from back then had really hurt him. Yan Changxing hid the spiritual shuttles in the void. Actually, he had to go through some unknown arrangements. That was why he had to forcefully block the yellow hand the first time. Only when it attacked a second time did he use this method. Now, he didn't want to be passive anymore. With a deep shout, he shook his body and revealed his Dharma form. In an instant, a giant pagoda heavenly palace that was as majestic as a mountain, with 99 floors, accompanied by wind and lightning, stood proudly in the vault of heaven. With a rumble, it actually released tens of thousands of rays of light, which turned into balls of lightning, covering the sky and earth as it struck down. Zhang Yan smiled and shook his shoulders slightly. A mass of chaotic netherworld chi appeared behind him. It was deep and unfathomable, as if it contained yin and yang and filled up the heaven and earth. With a thought, endless thunder and lightning appeared in his Dharma form and leaped into the sky to attack. The two collided and another wave of lightning rippled out. Yan Changxing snorted. He didn't want to fight against Zhang Yan's Dharma. When fighting against an enemy, it was important to combine the two. Right now, he was using this method to tie down his opponent and defeat him. He had other methods. After sensing for a while, he had already found his target. With a call in his mind, the 12 spiritual shuttles suddenly flew out from the void and headed in one direction with lightning speed. Zhang Yan was also alert. He realized that the direction he was heading in was the place where a wisp of chi of origin had landed. He was ready to launch a strong attack, so he retracted his thoughts. However, he was still a step too late. The spiritual shuttles split up and attacked. A few of them intercepted the circuit and a few of them pecked at the Dharma, cutting off a section of the chi of origin. A wisp of chi of origin was also instantly dissipated. Zhang Yan wasn't infuriated when he saw this, and he nodded instead. His opponent's attack was sharp, decisive, and peerlessly swift. Moreover, his movements were extremely skilled, and he didn't allow the slightest bit of carelessness. Just now, although the amount of chi of origin that was dissipated wasn't much, and it wasn't much to a person from a grotto heaven, the battle wasn't something that could be decided in a short period of time. If this dragged on, his opponent would succeed and it accumulated, it would be a considerable amount. However, he had already expected this. Yan Changxing's peers were mostly in the grotto heaven realm. In addition, he represented the 12 grotto heaven realms, so there would definitely be many opportunities for them to learn from each other. Not to mention, he had personally killed a grotto heaven realm cultivator. In comparison, he had just obtained a grotto heaven realm. Although he had forced Luo Mingze to retreat, it was only a single exchange. He hadn't really fought with all his might. In terms of battle experience, he definitely wasn't as good as his opponent. Since he couldn't defend against it, then he might as well ignore it. He let out a clear shout, and with a single breath, he sent his Dharma idol flying for tens of thousands of miles and pressed forward. As expected, the heavenly palace Dharma had no choice but to retreat slightly. It was obvious that it didn't want to fight him head-on. However, halfway through, the heavenly shuttle continued to attack and peck at the chi of origin. Zhang Yan, however, didn't move at all. It was as if he didn't care at all. He continued to release his chi of origin, which turned into countless bolts of lightning that bombarded his opponent. No matter how a grotto heaven realm cultivator fought, this type of frontal attack was always the strongest. As long as the other party didn't escape, he could only try his best to defend. However, this would also consume his own chi of origin. Zhang Yan's strategy was simple. He had already achieved the Dharma. Heaven and earth were his spiritual cave. He wasn't afraid of consuming chi of origin. If you used one part of your strength, I would use 5. If it wasn't enough, then I would use 10, or even 100. Even if I used 100% of my strength, in the end, I would still be the winner. This kind of battle formation was upright. No matter how many changes you made, it was useless. Changxing Yan didn't know about Zhang Yan's background. He thought that he was taking advantage of his weaker cultivation and insufficient mana. Therefore, he maintained his frontal attack. However, after fighting for a long time, he realized that even though Zhang Yan's chi of origin was consumed, he didn't show any signs of weakening. Instead, he seemed to be getting stronger. He had a thought and thought to himself, could it be that he brought that magical treasure? If that's the case, it's no wonder he has the confidence to compete with me. Let's not tangle with him. He shouted and retracted his Dharma. He slowly retreated and fought as he retreated. They were fighting in this place. In the mortal world, the sky above was dark as though dark clouds covered the sky. The sun and moon lost their light. Thunder rumbled beside their ears and lightning flashed. It was unknown how many people were kneeling on the ground and praying to Heaven Duke to quell his anger. The battlefield between the two of them was slowly moving towards the northeast. Unknowingly, they had moved from the Middle Pillar continent to the North Darkstar continent. Chapter 944. Outside the heavens, Zhang Yan stood on the cloud with his hands behind his back. A ball of profound energy filled the sky behind him, and he revealed an appearance that was steady like a mountain. He stirred up a wave of lightning that covered an area of 5,000 kilometers, and he slowly pressed forward with great might, yet he forced the Tempest Pagoda to retreat ceaselessly. He was very clear about how his chi worked, where it was stored, and where it landed. To Yan Changxing, who cultivated the senses, it was as clear as watching a fire. To compete with him in subtle changes, it was undoubtedly using one's weakness to counter the enemy's strength. The only way was to suppress the enemy with vigorous chi. The two had been fighting for a whole day. The movement of his chi had changed from rough at the beginning, but it had become more and more skillful. The opponent had less and less of an advantage. This was like a peer practicing with him. The longer the battle dragged on, the more advantageous it was for him. Another 2 days passed as the two of them collided repeatedly. Intentionally or unintentionally, they had already arrived above the sky of the northern Darkstar continent. After another wave of thunder tide collided, Zhang Yan's mind flickered and his Dharma idols spread out, surrounding him from both sides. If he couldn't resolve it in time and was enveloped by his Dharma, he could use his vigorous chi to refine it. As for whether or not the opponent would retract his Dharma and fly to another place to avoid it, he wasn't afraid at all. Ordinary cultivators couldn't compare to the battle between the people of the Grotto Heaven. Their Dharma clashed for thousands of miles and the chi spread everywhere. Once they got into a battle, they couldn't retract their Dharma in an instant. Unless they were willing to sacrifice half of it, it would be difficult to retreat in an instant. Yan Changsheng obviously knew this, so he slowly retreated. He pushed away the chi that was pressing in and didn't let it surround him. After Zhang Yan forced him back over 500 kilometers, he suddenly raised his hand, and countless Netheresium heavy water leaped out from within the profound chi that was 5,000 kilometers in radius. It covered the sky, and it was simply innumerable. Mixed within the lightning, it struck down in unison. At this stage, the Shenming heavy water was born with just a thought. Although it was different from the Lan Yun's secret book's harmony of chi and thunder. But with the support of vigorous mana, it was extremely powerful. Yan Changsheng saw that he was coming and didn't want to fight him head-on. He laughed. Good. Not only did he not retreat, instead he took a step forward. At the same time, he waved his sleeve and drew out a magic sword, slashing at the void in front of him. In an instant, a vast expanse of white void chi stretched out for thousands of miles, as if a heavenly river had appeared out of thin air. The boundless heavy water arrived in front of him. It was clearly not far away, but as soon as it came into contact with the void energy, it was as if it had reached the end of the world, falling head first. Even the lightning bolts disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye, as if they had entered another world. Yan Changsheng's technique was called, divide the two realms again. He had learned it from Zhui Yuming years ago. With a slash of the sword, it was as if the two realms had been divided. It was a divine ability that prevented one's side from being affected by Dharma power. Although he wasn't as powerful as Zhui Yuming, he was strong enough to deal with the current situation. The Shenming heavy water fell downwards, smashing through several layers of high clouds, but didn't stop. It crashed into the North Dark Star continent, causing the mountains to shake and the earth to collapse. Countless mountains were crushed, and almost half of the continent was shaken. At this moment, in the extreme north of the continent, in the palace of Lord Yuanjun, the demon Lord Ji Wang was resting in the inner hall. Suddenly, he heard the sound of thunder and felt his spirit shaking. He got up and asked, "What is that sound?" The servant hurried over and knelt down, saying, "Do not panic, Your Majesty. Just now, a letter came from outside the hall, saying that the Qinsong school wants to settle things with that person, so the two of them fought. Just now, they have come to the North Dark Star continent." When he mentioned that person, he pointed in the direction of the Central Pillar continent. Ji Wang was still shocked and said, "If it's an internal matter of the Qinsong school, then why did they come to the North Dark Star continent? Could it be that the fight is fake, and they actually want to destroy the demon court?" Ever since the demon emperor was killed by the combined forces of the Shidu sect and the cultivators from beyond the heavens, the descendants of the Ji family fled to other continents. About 2,000 years ago, a powerful demon king appeared in the family. He gathered 8 demon tribes to intercept the spiritual opportunity of the North Dark Star continent. However, it caused Qin Qingang to personally lead the 12 paradises to attack. In the end, they lost the battle, and the remaining bloodline established the Water Kingdom with the support of the Qinsong school. At that time, the Python, Tortoise, and Carp tribes submitted to the Qinsong school on the surface, and became the vassals of the Water Kingdom in name, while the rest of the tribes fled to the extreme north of the North Dark Star continent and established this Lord Origin Palace with the support of another bloodline. However, the descendants of the Ji family only wanted to enjoy the support of the tribes, and no longer had the ambition they had in the past. With the 2 paradises from the Qinsong school coming to their heads, it was no wonder that he was so terrified. The servant said, "Marley said that with him and Mark Yen in charge, Your Majesty can just sit in the inner court, and there is no need to worry." Ji Wang was stunned at first, then he sneered, "If there is really no need to worry, these two should go and chase them away." How can they allow outsiders to be so presumptuous in the land of the ancestral court? The servant didn't dare to reply, he just bowed down and didn't move. Ji Wang looked up at the sky, his eyes were lifeless, but he muttered, "It's a pity that Marquis Luo and Marquis Chu are outside, otherwise, why would I be afraid?" In his eyes, Chu Yu and Luo Mengzhou were able to survive the battle back then. Even when the Four Beasts formation was broken a few hundred years ago, they were able to escape unscathed. As for the two Jinren beside him, they only became paradises 1,000 years later. No matter if it was in terms of achievements or status, they couldn't be compared to the former. After a while, he still heard the thunder outside, and he was very annoyed. He pushed the concubine beside him away and ordered, "Quickly go and get ready, I am going to the palace of the deep sea to hide." The servant agreed, and just as he was about to go, he heard a dignified voice, "Your Majesty, you must not do this." There was a ripple in the pool of the hall, and a shadow appeared. It was a hale and hearty Daoran, his eyebrows long, his forehead wide and round. Although his face was kind, when he looked at people, his eyes were especially sinister. He said with a gloomy face, "There are only two Qinsong Jinren fighting outside, they haven't really come to kill. Your Majesty is the hope of all the tribes. If you retreat in fear, how will you lead the tribes to restore the demon court in the future?" His voice was like a great bell, and as he spoke, the entire hall shook, actually covering the sound of thunder. Ji Wang seemed to be very afraid of this, and took a few steps back, his face turning extremely pale. He cowered and said, I will listen to Marquis' orders." Only then was Daoran satisfied, and he softened his tone, "Your Majesty can just wait here, Mark Yen and I will take care of the external affairs." As soon as he finished speaking, the light flashed and disappeared. After a while, Ji Wang confirmed that he had left, and then relaxed, but then his face became incomparably sinister. He called the trembling servant over, and took off a polished broken horn, gritted his teeth, and said, "Find a suitable person, and send this item to Marquis Chu or Marquis Luo, they will understand my intentions." Above the clouds, Yan Changxing used his methods several times, laying a trap to tempt Zhang Yan to attack, but the latter did not care at all, and seemed to be focused on fighting with him to wear down his yuan qi. He had a slightly serious expression. Zhang Yan's attitude must have given him a great deal of pressure. Although he had used the divine shuttle to cut off some of the others' yuan qi, it was not just a corner, and did not harm the foundation. This Duzhen Hall Master's yuan qi is very thick, but to use mana and supernatural powers without any regard for the consequences, even if he can win against me, after returning within 100 years, his cultivation will not improve at all. If that talisman is not really by his side, then junior brother Qin must have promised him some reward. That's why he is willing to use so much strength. Thinking about this, he could not help but chuckle. If he did not lose his cultivation, he would not be afraid, and he could go all out to attack. But now was different from the past. According to the current situation, before he could completely destroy Zhang Yan's yuan qi, he would first have to exhaust his strength, and he had to change his moves before the situation reversed. Only then would he have a chance of winning. But Zhang Yan's yuan qi was clenched. This was like a fist clenched in one place, and fighting head-on was obviously a bad plan. The only way was to use a trick to separate it, then it would be easier to attack. After thinking, he shook his body and separated out a ball of yuan qi, and with a point of his finger, it suddenly turned into a human, wearing a loose robe with big sleeves, and full of spirit, just like his own body. His feet rode on the auspicious clouds, and with a sword in hand, he broke into the formation. In just a few breaths, the yuan qi broke through tens of miles. Zhang Yan's expression shook, knowing that the opponent finally couldn't help but change his move. He took a look and nodded. So it is the technique of turning yuan qi into a body. Here, the dharma of the two people, both were formed by the yuan qi, and there was a soul in it. As for the body, it was hidden elsewhere and not here. As for the clone that was formed before him, it was an ability that could only be executed after entering the manifestation realm, and it was called the manifest yang spirit body. It required at least 30% to 30% of true essence qi to be condensed, and the more true essence qi was poured into it, the more formidable the divine ability of the clone would be. Not to mention that the clone moved and retreated as he wished. What was more dangerous was that even if it was a first-class true weapon, it could still be controlled, and it was equivalent to having an ordinary opponent. But this Dharma body could only be maintained for 1 to 2 days, unless it was supplemented with blood. Then it could exist for a long time, but in terms of magical power, it was enough to bring him a lot of trouble. To deal with this technique, the most suitable way to deal with it was to similarly split the Yuan Qi and form an external body to deal with it. It was just that by doing so, it could very well be what the opponent wanted. But after thinking about it, although it was very likely that this was a bait set by the opponent, it was also a chance for him. Therefore, he shook his shoulder, and a strand of Yuan Qi was formed, instantly forming a clone. It was handsome, and with a black robe covering its body, it went to meet the opponent. Yan Changsheng saw that Zhang Yan also formed a clone, and his eyes shone brightly. He pointed with his finger, and the 12 shuttles all rushed forward. For a moment, all of them landed on the place where the Yuan Qi was formed, and they slashed, and then with lightning, in just a few breaths, they tore open a path in front of them. Then, he shook his body, and the Dharma behind him rumbled, bringing with it endless wind and thunder, and took the initiative to rush forward. Zhang Yan laughed. Just now, even though he had split a lot of Yuan Qi, but because of his deep foundation, he still had the upper hand in a head-on fight. Therefore, he was not afraid. He took a step, and the Xian Qi behind him tumbled, covering the sky and earth. Just when the two of them were about to collide, Yan Changsheng gently shook his sleeve, and a beast foot lamp flew out. As the flame swayed, there seemed to be the silhouette of a woman, and it flew into mid-air. Suddenly, it landed and released a ball of dim yellow light. The moment this light appeared, the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth suddenly retracted, as if it was locked in place in an instant. At the same time, Yan Changsheng roared with his sword, and his voice was like thunder. His feet stirred up the wind, and his body turned into a ray of light, and went straight to where Zhang Yan was hiding. Floating astronomy. Chapter 945. Yan Changsheng's sword came. Even though the two of them were 100 miles apart, Zhang Yan felt a slight pain between his eyebrows, as if he was being pricked by a needle. He suddenly realized that this slash of his opponent's wasn't for any other reason, and it was definitely coming straight for his soul. Even though the Dharma was formed by essence, it still needed the soul to control it. If it was destroyed by an external force, it would be the same as losing its head. Even if it didn't die from the injury, it would be hard for it to fight against the enemy. When people in the Grotto Heaven fought, there were many ways to attack the soul. In the demon doctrine, there were many people who were good at this. But usually, the soul was protected by layers of Dharma essence, like a human body. It was considered the most tightly guarded place. It was extremely difficult to break through from the front. But at this moment, Yan Changsheng used the help of the treasure to stabilize the spiritual opportunity. If he used some powerful techniques, he might be able to do it. In the blink of an eye, he was already within 10 miles. To the cultivators in the Grotto Heaven, this distance was just inches away. There was a loud shout and a strong sword light flashed. Like a bolt of lightning, it tore apart the Xian Qi clouds and attacked from afar. Zhang Yan raised his head and looked at the sky. He didn't panic at all. The Xian Qi behind him shook and a divine light flashed. It looked like it was displaying 5 colors. One of the watercolored lights was like a dragon that raised its head and swept across the sky. Before the beast-footed lantern could react, it fell into the lantern's body involuntarily. For a moment, it became muddle-headed. It was like its consciousness had returned to the time when it was about to be opened. But it was, after all, a true weapon. It immediately came back to its senses and wanted to fly away. But no matter how hard it tried, it was suppressed by a strong force and couldn't escape. At this moment, the situation on the battlefield had been turned around. The 5-colored rainbow behind Zhang Yan flashed again. Another golden light shot out. It was like a thin thread and was extremely fast. It instantly collided with the sword light. It was like 2 long swords clashing in the air. There was the sound of metal clashing and sparks were created. With this touch, Not only did the flying golden light force the sword light back, but it also pushed forward. He charged all the way to Yan Changxing. He didn't dodge or evade. He raised the sword in his hand and blocked, but he heard a soft sound. When he looked again, the sword had already been broken. He couldn't help but exclaim, "Good move!" Looking up, he saw that the boundless Xian Qi in the sky was evolving into the Khanate form. For a moment, it filled the sky and earth, rolling over as if it wanted to devour him in one go. With a loud laugh, he casually tossed the broken sword aside and shook the magic pagoda behind him, releasing countless thunder and fire astral winds. Unexpectedly, he didn't try to retreat, but instead took the initiative to face the attack head-on. Zhang Yan nodded inwardly and praised. His opponent's attack had failed. He was already deep in the formation. If he retreated hastily, it would only give him a chance to chase after him. He might as well throw away all his worries and fight with his life on the line. Without any hesitation, he gathered his magical power and brought his hand down. The Xian Qi behind him came crashing down. As long as he could trap the Dharma form, no matter how it changed, as long as the soul within it did not escape, he would have a chance of winning. But just now, he was pressing forward. However, he realized that the opponent's defense was unexpectedly weak, like a hot knife through butter. In just a few breaths, he broke through the layers of wind, thunder, fire, and lightning, encircling it tightly in their arms. He frowned slightly and felt that something was wrong. The opponent was so weak, it didn't seem like the Dharma form was there, but more like an essence Qi clone. Right at this moment, he suddenly sensed something. It was a warning sign from the location of the vital Qi doppelganger. His ears also heard the sound of thunder and lightning 1,000 miles away. It seemed that the aura of Yan Changxing's vital Qi doppelganger had increased, and it was several times stronger than before. He couldn't help but think, could it be that the main target is there? His eyes narrowed. Judging from the situation in front of him, it was highly likely that Yan Changxing had used a technique to change between real and fake, creating the illusion that his real body was here. In reality, he had only left behind a doppelganger formed from a small amount of essence Qi to distract him. His true target was the essence Qi doppelganger on the other side. He knew that the clone had less than 30% of the essence Qi. If it really encountered Yan Changxing's Dharma form, it would not be a match. Should he save or not? He thought for a moment. Yan Changxing's essence Qi clone was also in his hands. It was like prey in a net. Right now, he only needed to put in a bit more effort to destroy it. If he was fast enough and rushed over in time, he would be able to attack the opponent from both sides. His chances of winning would be much higher. By the same logic, if Yan Changxing took care of his clone first and rushed over, then he would be in a disadvantageous situation. At this moment, his gaze became a little deeper. Let's see who is faster. With that thought in mind, he ignored the chaos 1,000 miles away and acted as if he didn't hear it. Instead, he increased the intensity of his attacks. The heavenly thunder of heavy water came crashing down with the momentum of the sky. Under the attack, the 99 floors of the pagoda continued to explode. Although it returned to its original state in the blink of an eye and looked unharmed, the essence Qi that was worn out could not be replenished. After 10 breaths, a jade snow pill suddenly appeared on the top of the pagoda. It was faintly discernible, like an illusion. Within it, there was a streak of red blood. It looked bright and eye-catching. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and asked, 3 treasure phase bead? Before he came out, he knew that there would be a battle. Therefore, he specially asked around about the real treasures that Yan Changxing had taken away from the sect. This 3 treasure phase bead was one of them. This treasure was not a weapon for killing, and it had no defensive ability. However, if a person from the heavenly abode used his essence Qi to inject it, he could transform it into its original form for a short period of time. When he fought, it could be used to confuse the enemy and also as a surprise weapon. If he was really dealing with a pearl from the start, it meant that Yan Changxing's essence Qi clone was not here. Yan Changxing was personally dealing with his clone. As if responding to his thoughts at the same time, he also sensed that his avatar was in imminent danger. If he didn't go to save it, he feared that he wouldn't be able to gain the slightest advantage and would lose 30% of his essence chi for nothing. To completely destroy this pagoda, he would need at least an hour. Should he let it go and save it, or should he not change his original intention and fight to the end? In an instant, he made a decision. He sneered and continued to ignore the changes happening outside his body. He only used his mana layer by layer. After another 2 hours, there was a rumble. It was as if the sky was splitting and the earth was collapsing. The pagoda completely collapsed. Zhang Yan waved his hand and split the stellar energy flow Xian missed. He looked at a tall figure and smiled. Jinren Yan, as expected, you are here. Yan Changsheng looked over. He scoffed and said, if you are shaken just now, then you will definitely lose this battle. If your mind is unsteady, then you will definitely lose this battle. However, your mind is as firm as a mountain, difficult to shake. I have lost this battle. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, I know that Jinren hasn't used up all his tricks. You can hide in the heavenly abode, but I can't find you. When a person from the heavenly abode was in danger, he could hide in his own heavenly abode at all costs. Once he did that, even if you knew where he was, you wouldn't be able to do anything. Yan Changsheng's brow rose up and he shook his sleeves. A loss is a loss. Hiding in the heavenly abode is just a struggle at death's door. I don't want to do that. Zhang Yan sighed and felt slightly regretful. The other wasn't hiding it at all. He could sense that the other's essence energy was exhausted and he was like a lamp on the verge of death. It was obvious that the battle just now was to squeeze out the last bit of energy. If he was at his peak, who knew what it would be like? Unfortunately, he wouldn't have the chance to experience it. Yan Changsheng raised his head and said with a burning gaze, however, I have to ask, how did you see the flaw just now? Zhang Yan smiled. Jinren's transformation has reached a wondrous level. I can't see through it, but I don't believe that someone can tangle with me for a long time. It's just one pill. At this point, his tone was filled with unparalleled confidence. Yan Changsheng was startled for a moment before bursting into laughter. After a long while, he finally stopped and nodded his head, his eyes filled with praise. Then he changed the topic and asked, if your judgment was wrong, what would happen? Zhang Yan replied honestly, if that's the case, Jinren shouldn't blame me for only using the sword to fight. Even if I can't win, I won't lose. Normal treasures were useless against people from the heavenly abode, but the sword pill was different. Essence energy could be stored in it, and it could fly around and attack from the side. If Zhang Yan had used the guerrilla fighting method right from the start, Yan Changsheng would indeed only be able to respond passively. However, in the end, he would only be forcing his opponent to focus on defense. Who knew how long it would take to resolve this matter, so he did not use it. Yan Changsheng thought for a moment and sighed. This is the truth. He waved his hand and 4 Taoist apparitions appeared in midair. There were men and women, old and young. He looked around and said, that day, I forced all of you to follow me. Now that Hall Master Du Zhen is here, follow him back to the mountain gate. The 5 of them bowed to him and bowed to Zhang Yan before turning into divine light and entering his sleeve. With a wave of his hand, Yan Changsheng tossed a jade talisman over and said, with this, you can enter the cave I created. There are quite a few pill jades inside, and they were given to me by Junior Sister Qin years ago. I originally wanted to leave them for my disciple to comprehend, but now it looks like there's no need for them, so Hall Master Du Zhen can take them back. Zhang Yan was surprised, but after thinking about it he understood. The previous Hall Master of Du Zhen Hall, Zhui Yuming, gave Qin Yu quite a lot of elixir jade. Normally, even if she didn't use it, her disciples could enjoy it. However, the strange thing was that there were not many talented disciples. He thought it was strange and suspected that she didn't have the ability to teach disciples. Now, it seemed like the elixir jade was sent here. He took the jade talisman and put it in his sleeve. He bowed and said, then I will keep it first. Tomorrow, when Jinren's successor has the ability to protect himself, I will return it. Yan Changsheng took a deep look and said, there is a technique stored in my grotto heaven. I secretly figured it out after I broke out of the door. Even if the cultivators in the sect don't cultivate the nerve of sensing, after understanding it, they will be able to sense qi movement during fights. I will leave it to Hall Master Du Zhen to bring back to the mountain gate. When Zhang Yan heard this, his expression turned serious and he said, I will bring it back to the mountain gate. I will not let down Jinren Yan's efforts. Yan Changsheng turned around and looked at the boundless mountains and rivers under his feet. He laughed and sang, a young man with a sword on his back, Xian Ye's immortal seeking tower. Once he heard the Tao, he roamed freely between heaven and earth. Life is comfortable and happy, I write wildly about spring and autumn. Longevity is not my wish, I only want to relieve the worries in my heart. When he finished singing, his breath disappeared. His voice echoed in the mountains for a long time. In the distant sky, only a row of startled geese flew past. Chapter 946. The battle between Zhang Yan and Yan Changsheng had attracted the attention of the world since the beginning. Now that the battle had finally ended, the Zenrens of all the sects in the Donghua continent all had different expressions on their faces. All of them were filled with fear. The Dong Tian could live for 3,000 years and had the ability to split the sky and earth. Moreover, they cherished their vitality, so they rarely fought, let alone taking the lives of their peers. However, if Zhang Yan could kill Yan Changsheng today, he might be able to kill them in the future. On a peak outside of Mount Green Inch, Huang Yugong and Spiritual Master Shi were also watching the battle from beginning to end. When they sensed that Yan Changsheng's aura was cut off and the divine light disappeared, they remained silent. Huang Yugong sighed and said, Jinren Yan was so high-spirited in the past. I didn't expect him to end up like this. His 3,000 years of cultivation is gone. What a pity. Jinren Shi sighed as well. Huang Yugong looked at the Xian Qi disappearing and said, Jinren Zhang has been cultivating for less than 600 years, and he is already so powerful. In another 1,000 years, looking at the 9 continents, I wonder if there will be anyone who can compete with him. Jinren Shi said in a low voice, that is not something we can care about. In another few hundred years, the 3 trials will occur simultaneously. We can only help our sects avoid this, and then we can talk about other things. Huang Yugong nodded and said, You are right, Taoist. Suddenly, his expression changed as if he thought of something. He looked up and asked, Previously, you went to Yuanyang to visit a friend because of the trial. What did Yuanyang sect say? Jinren Shi said coldly, They said the same thing. They directly asked us to make him the leader. Huang Yugong couldn't help but frown and said, What is Yuanyang sect planning? Does he really think he can survive the trial with his wealth? Jinren Shi sneered and said, Maybe he has something to rely on. Huang Yugong stroked his beard and thought for a while. After a while, he said, Our sects are still weak. I will go to the west in a few days. Jinren Shi said casually, Have you thought about joining forces with the south? Huang Yugong was startled and turned to look at him. Jinren Shi looked over at the same time. He didn't look away at all. Huang Yugong hesitated. After a while, he said, This is an important matter. Let me go back and discuss it with sect leader Jinren. Spiritual Master Shi nodded and said, Then, I'll wait for your reply. At this moment, both of them sensed something and looked back. They saw that the surging Xian Qi that had been concealing for a long time was slowly receding, and the grand spiritual vigor was also faintly discernible. Huang Yugong said, I'm afraid that Jinren Zhang must have paid a heavy price to defeat Yan Changsheng this time. I'm sure that he will return to his sect and go into seclusion in a few days. He probably won't come out within 100 years. Jinren Shi, however, did not think much of it. He said, This Jinren Zhang has only been cultivating for less than 600 years, yet he has already formed his own grotto heaven. I'm afraid that the loss of some of his qi of essence is not a big deal. For a major sect like the Qinsong school, they have a lot of assets and a lot of treasures, so it shouldn't be difficult for them to recover. Our 2 sects can't compare. I'm sure fellow Taoist Huang knows this as well. Towards the end, his words seemed to contain a deeper meaning. Huang Yugong chuckled. I've been out for a long time, so it's time to go back. Fellow Taoist, there's no need to send me off. After saying that, he bowed and flew away. Spiritual Master Shi watched as he turned into a beam of light and left. When he was completely out of sight, his eyes flickered, and he drew a circle with his finger, forming a flying letter. After he flicked his finger, he also turned into a streak of light. He returned to his own cave abode. Blood Soul Sect, Sage Meeting Stage. When Qingxiang and a handsome Taoist were also watching the battle. Seeing that the Xianqi finally invaded the sky and the winner was decided, he said with a smile, "It seems that I was right, Zhenren Zhang really won." The Taoist said with a grave expression, "This new palace master of the Qinsong school is indeed a great enemy of our Ling sect. Among the younger generation of the 6 sects, only spiritual master Yuan of the Netherspring sect can be compared to him." When Qingxiang said, "This Zhenren Zhang is indeed powerful, but judging from this battle, it is still biased." The Taoist said, "That's right. This Yan Chongxing was schemed against by the sect master of the Qinsong school in his early years. His cultivation has been greatly damaged, and he is no longer as brave as he was in the past. But even so, if you or I were to go up, would we have the confidence to defeat this person?" When Qingxiang smiled and did not reply. He looked up at the sky and thought to himself, "After this battle, the Qinsong school has no more internal troubles. What's left is only external worries. I wonder where their next move will be." At this moment, Zhang Yan was already riding on a beam of light, returning to the central pillar continent from the 7th heaven. He looked over, his eyes calm, but the aura on him was even deeper and more unpredictable than when he came. After the battle with Yan Chongxing, he had learned a lot. He thought that when he returned, he would go into seclusion and meditate to understand the mysteries. A day later, he returned to the peak where Yan Chongxing lived. When he landed, he saw that the ground was covered with withered branches and leaves, and only a pine tree was still standing. He stood under the tree and stared at it for a moment. Then he pointed his finger, and the leaves on the ground gathered back together, forming a simple hut, but it was no different from the previous one. He walked into the hut and sat down. With a wave of his sleeve, he spread out the 6 true treasures on the rock and inspected them one by one. Among these true treasures, 2 originally came from the same lineage, and the other 4 were taken by Yan Chongxing from the aristocratic families. Amongst them were defensive treasures, spirit-fixing treasures, and precious treasures for flight. Even if they didn't possess any weapons of slaughter, if they were to serve a single person as their master and cooperate with each other, then there would probably be very few in the world that could go against them. In particular, there was a flying moon traversing raft that could travel beyond the 9 heavens. If Yan Chongxing were to go there during the battle, Zhang Yan was not completely confident in stopping him. In reality, before he came here, he thought that it would be a bitter battle. He did not think that the outcome would be decided so quickly. At this moment, the tri-jewel phase beads flashed with brilliance, and a middle-aged Confucian scholar leaped out. He bowed to Zhang Yan and said, "That rude Yan Chongxing actually dared to kidnap us. Many thanks to Taoist Master for rescuing us from the abyss of suffering. From today onwards, I am willing to serve Taoist Master." Zhang Yan looked down and said, "Even if Tao Master Yan is at fault, it is not your place to speak." The middle-aged Confucian scholar was shocked and quickly lowered his head. He bowed and said, "Yes, Tao Master is right. This lowly one has been rude." As the two spoke, they heard a faint sigh. "Tao Master, please do not blame Tao Brother manifestation. We have been trapped for thousands of years, constantly on tenterhooks and trembling with fear. Now that we are free, it is inevitable that we will lose our composure." Zhang Yan looked towards the source of the voice and saw a beautiful woman with thin shoulders and a slender waist coming out of the moon-crossing raft. The woman bowed to him and said, "Just now, Tao Master is wondering why Tao Master Yan has so many treasures, but he did not use them?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "That is indeed the case. I previously thought that there was some powerful restriction placed on your bodies, which was why Tao Master Yan could not use them. Just now, after inspecting you, I see that it is not the case." The woman said, "To be honest, this is because we are not willing to work for Tao Master Yan." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and said, "I heard that when Tao Master Yan took you away, he threatened to destroy your spirits. Since you admitted defeat then, why are you not afraid after that? The woman smiled mournfully and said, At first, we thought that spiritual master Yen kidnapped us to fight, but later we found out that his goal was not that. He wanted to use us as a sacrifice for his disciple in case of an emergency. Zhang Yen was slightly surprised when he heard this, but after thinking about it again, he felt that with Tao Master Yan's temper, it was possible that he would do such a thing. However, this matter of combining the Dharma was also very dangerous. One mistake and the treasures and spirits would be damaged, so it was no wonder that they were full of complaints. However, I have a question. To fuse the spirits and form the grotto heaven, this method requires the obedience of the weapons. If you are not willing, then what can you do? The middle-aged scholar smiled bitterly and said, You may not know, but Tao Master Yen is extremely talented. Although he formed the grotto heaven with the sensory nerve, his cultivation method has gradually broken away from the original rut. He can use his spirit to confuse our true consciousness and make us submit in a short period of time. Zhang Yen thought for a while and nodded. Yes, Tao Master Yen does have this ability. He thought back to the time when he was fighting with Yen Chongsheng. His vital essence avatar had repeatedly sent out warning signs. Afterwards, he withdrew it and found that nothing had happened. He understood that he had been hit by some kind of method that disturbed his senses. Now that he heard this, he realized that it was a method derived from the sensory nerves. He thought to himself, I wonder if there is such a method in the cultivation method that Tao Master Yen gave me. I will have to go through it when I get back. Now that his doubts were cleared, he raised his sleeves and put the 6 weapons back into his sleeves. He was ready to bring them back to the sect master to decide. After waiting in the mountain for a day, 2 rays of light landed on the cliff. He opened his eyes and saw that other than LV Junyang, there was also a young cultivator with a jade-like face. He did not care and looked at LV Junyang, saying, Tao Master Yen has passed, you can follow I back to the mountain. LV Junyang asked calmly, Tao Master Zhang, is my master's primordial spirit safe? The other young cultivator also showed a look of concern. Zhang Yen said indifferently, This matter has already been arranged by the sect master. Tao Master Yen had many enemies when he was alive, so it is better for Tao Master Lu not to know about this for now. LV Junyang was silent for a moment and did not say anything else. He only bowed. Zhang Yen looked at the young cultivator and said, Are you also Tao Master Yan's disciple? The man's heart tightened. He took a step forward and cupped his hands, saying, I am Jiao Yuanliang, also Master Yan's disciple. Zhang Yen nodded. If that is the case, you can also be considered as my Qinsong disciple. It is really not easy for you to cultivate to such a level outside the mountain, and you are only a step away from the 3rd stage. This time, follow me back. Jiao Yuanliang was overjoyed and excited. He went forward and Thank you, Tao Master. Thank you, Tao Master. Zhang Yen stood up and said, The 2 of you, stay calm and wait. LV Junyang and Tao Master Yen did as they were told. Zhang Yen shook his sleeves, and a bright light appeared from the ground, splitting the clouds in the sky. Then, it shot up into the sky and brought the 2 of them up to the clouds, flying straight to the Donghua continent. Just half a day later, the Great Lake of Longyuan was already in sight. However, when he arrived, his eyes flashed slightly and he stopped moving. After a few breaths, a bright golden ray shot out from the north, passing through the Great Lake in an instant, and arrived in front of him. Once the light shone, Jinren Peng, who was wearing bright clothes and a high bun, walked out. She swept her gaze over Lu Junyang and the other man and said in an unfriendly tone, Are you Yen Chongsheng's disciples? Chapter 947. Taoist Peng was a grotto heaven cultivator. At this moment, there was a fierce light in his eyes as he stared straight at Su Quebec. He had a terrifying aura. Lu Junyang was still indifferent. His expression was calm, but Jiao Yuanliang was startled. How could he say anything? Immortal Peng coldly glanced at the 2, then bowed to Zhang Yen and said, Peng Wenin greets Hall Master Ji Zhen. Zhang Yen raised his sleeves and cupped his hands. Jinren Peng is too polite. Immortal Peng took a light breath and seemed to calm down a little. He said, Hall Master Du Jin, just now you're returning to the mountain gate. It's really presumptuous of me to stop you, but I have to come because of a matter. I hope Hall Master Du Jin can forgive me. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, I know why Jinren Peng is here. Is it about Jinren Su in the past? Immortal Peng looked up and said in a low voice, Because of this, I will never forget the revenge of killing my teacher. When Yen Changsheng broke out of the sect, he slaughtered many disciples of the aristocratic families. Apart from Peng Yuzhou, who was not in the sect for some reason and escaped, almost all of the disciples of the 10 great aristocratic families were killed by him. Apart from that, there were also many cultivators from influential families that were casually killed by him. In particular, the Su clan had a grudge against his deceased disciple, so he purposely killed his way to the Su clan. His actions were also extremely ruthless. At that time, Su Mo was the enlightened master of the Su clan. Even though he knew how powerful Yen Changsheng was, he had no choice but to step forward and fight with him. He was just one move behind, and in the end he was defeated and died. Taoist Peng was his direct disciple. After this matter, because the Su clan no longer had Taoist heavenly abode to hold the fort, the powerful cultivators in the clan were all slaughtered, and the clan gradually declined. In order to revive the clan, all the good things were given to the clan members first. Because Taoist Peng was not a member of the Su clan. Moreover, she was born in Hanpu and didn't have much of a relationship with the Su clan. Therefore, Su Mo had promised to give her a cave abode and treasures for her cultivation. It was also taken back by the Su clan. Without the external objects of cultivation, no matter how talented she would not be able to survive. There was nothing he could do. It was sect leader Qin who couldn't bear to see her vanish into the crowd. Hence, he gave her a place to cultivate in the name of guarding the small devil realm. Later on, she was able to form her grotto heaven because of this. Master's kindness is deep. Every time I think about it, I can't help but feel the pain in my heart. I hate that I can't personally avenge Master. I can only lament that my previous meritorious service was not enough, and because of sect leader's admonition, it was difficult for me to carry out the mission. Today, Du Jin Hall Master has killed this person, removing a great danger for our Qinsong, and also ending the enmity between my master and master. Please accept my, Peng Wennin's, bow to me. Speaking of this, Immortal Peng's expression became solemn. He bent his knees and bowed deeply, then bowed 3 times. Zhang Yan turned his body slightly. He said, Jinren Peng's words are too serious. This time I am doing this under the orders of the sect leader. Jinren must thank me. I should also thank sect leader. Immortal Peng straightened up, shook his head gently and said, You don't have to be modest, Du Jin Hall Master. Yen Changsheng has cultivated for nearly 3,000 years. Even though his cultivation was damaged after breaking the 4 symbols formation, his ferocious power is still there. Even his name is taboo, and few people in the sect dare to mention it in private. If it was someone else, how would they dare to do this? How would they dare to do this? Jiao Yuanliang was secretly shocked when he heard this. He also knew that his master had offended many people in the past, and when he broke out of the sect. He even killed a grotto heaven cultivator from Qinsong school with his own hands. However, he had no way of knowing the specific details. He did not expect that Jinren Peng was actually his disciple. Thinking that there was a grotto heaven Jinren in the sect who had a feud with his master for killing his master, and looking at his posture, it seemed that Jinren Peng had come specifically to seek revenge. His scalp was numb and he was anxious. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Jinren Yen has already passed away. Jinren Peng went to talk to I about this matter because of his 2 disciples. Jinren Peng said, That's right. Although Yen Changsheng is dead, his disciples are still alive. Jinren Peng, can you allow me to bring them back to vent my hatred? As she said this, she looked at Lu Wenyang and Jiao Yuanliang again. There was a piercing chill in her eyes. Jiao Yuanliang could not help but take a few steps back. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and turned the 2 people behind him. He said indifferently, I don't care what happened in the past, but I brought these 2 people back from outside the mountain. Naturally, I will protect them. Please forgive me, Jinren Peng. I can't agree to this matter. The fact that the sect leader wanted to cultivate the younger generation with all his strength was not something that could be publicized, so he did not say it out loud. He only took care of this matter. Jinren Peng saw that although his tone was calm, the meaning behind it was obvious that there was no room for discussion. He could not help but have a complicated expression. After a moment of silence, he said, "Since Hall Master Dujin insists on protecting these two people, Peng Wenin, am not someone who doesn't know when to advance or retreat. I don't dare to be rude in front of Hall Master Dujin. Let's drop this matter today." Her eyes then turned to Lu Junyang and Jiao Yuanliang, and she said coldly, "If you two have the ability, you can hide in the mountain gate." After saying this, she nodded to Zhang Yan. Then she waved her sleeves and turned into a conveyance light, returning to the cave residence. At this moment, Zhang Yan heard a voice in his ears. "Jinren Peng, please forgive me for my rude behavior today. I know Lu Junyang's talent. Since you brought him back to the mountain gate, he will certainly have a good fortune. However, you killed his master, so there is a knot in your heart. In the future, it will be inevitable that there will be discord. Jinren Peng has avenged my master, but I have no way to repay you. Today, let me be the villain." The voice became softer and softer. Gradually, the conveyance light went far away. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed slightly. He had guessed that sect leader Qin should have seen every move in Qinsong school. Jinren Peng came to them with great fanfare, but sect leader Qin was indifferent. Obviously, this matter was not as simple as it seemed. Only now did he know that Jinren Peng came to return the favor. This favor was actually not small. If Lu Junyang had not achieved anything, it would have been fine. However, he knew that the sect leader had taken a fancy to his aptitude and would do his best to cultivate him. If he were to break through to the next realm in the future, Jinren Peng would have to bear the risk of becoming enemies with a cave. However, after thinking about it carefully, Jinren Peng lived in the small cold world and had not yet opened up a cave. He did not have any powerful magic treasures. As for cultivation treasures, Zhang Yan, as the master of the Dujin Hall, naturally did not lack them. He could not take out a big gift to thank him, so he could only return the favor with a favor. Even if Lu Junyang could not see through Jinren Peng's behavior, it would not be difficult for him to guess it in the future. However, even if he knew, Zhang Yan's protection today was completely out of his own will, so he must accept it. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. He turned his head and said to Lu and Jiao, "The aristocratic families in the sect have a grudge against Jinren Peng. From now on, you must be careful when you walk in the sect." Lu Junyang cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for your advice, Jinren." Jiao Yuanliang also thanked him repeatedly. However, he was still uneasy. At the same time, he could not help but feel lucky. He thought to himself, "Fortunately, Jinren Peng is strong and has a very high status in the sect. If it was someone else, I can't guarantee that they would not give face to Jinren Peng." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Now, follow me to see Jinren Peng first." He rolled up his sleeves, and the two involuntarily followed him to the floating heavenly palace. Not long after, they landed on the platform. A boy came up to greet them and said respectfully, "Jinren Zhang, Jinren Peng is in the hall to welcome you." Zhang Yan said with concern, "The two of you wait here." The two of them agreed. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and entered. Not long after, he arrived at the hall. Not long after, he saw Jinren Peng standing on the jade platform. He cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Jinren Peng. Zhang Yan is back to report." With a smile on his face, Jinren Peng raised his hand and said, "Hall Master Dujin, you don't have to be so courteous. Please sit down and talk." Zhang Yan expressed his thanks and waited for sect leader Qin to sit down. Then he went to his seat and sat down. After that, he skipped over the details and roughly explained the situation. After listening, Jinren Peng stroked his beard and sighed. He said, "Since the beginning of senior brother Yan's cultivation, many people in the sect have regarded him as an anomaly. However, he has never cared about the opinions of others. He still does what he wants. At that time, my senior brothers and I admired him very much. Now that I think about it, his grace and elegance are still vivid in our minds. After sighing for a while, his expression returned to his usual calm. He asked, "Senior brother Yan's primordial spirit is safe?" Zhang Yan replied, "I made the decision on my own. I have already asked him to stay in a safe place." Jinren Peng nodded and said, "That's good." He knew that this senior brother of his was arrogant and would rather end his own life than meet him in this kind of situation. Thus, he didn't mention the matter of meeting him. Zhang Yan said, "Now that he is dead, all the grudges in the past should be settled. Disciple thinks that if LV Juanyang's cultivation is successful in the future, then I will let him take care of him." Jinren Peng thought for a while and said, "Hall Master Du Zhen is appropriate. Let's deal with it accordingly." Zhang Yan bowed and said, "Back then, Jinren Peng took away 6 true treasures. I have followed Jinren Peng's orders and brought them all back." He shook his sleeves and 6 streaks of light flew out. The moment they appeared, 6 streaks of light from restrictions landed on the roof of the hall and firmly locked them in place, not allowing them to move. On the true treasures, 6 silhouettes appeared. They were all panic-stricken and exclaimed out loud. Zhang Yan looked on indifferently and didn't say a word. Jinren Peng said expressionlessly, "Do you know your sins?" When the 6 true spirits heard that, most of them didn't know what to do. However, there was a smart one, the middle-aged Confucian, who knelt down on the spot and kowtowed, "Jinren Peng, please forgive us." That year, we only followed Jinren Peng because we wanted to live. Thinking about it now, we really regret it. From now on, we are willing to fight to the death for the sect to forgive our sins. When he said that, the other true spirits immediately came to their senses. They all knelt down and begged for mercy. Jinren Peng said indifferently, "Since that is the case, I will place a restriction in your true spirits as punishment. Are you all willing?" The middle-aged Confucian's body trembled. If he placed a restriction, he wouldn't be able to escape from them in the future. Even if he really wanted to merge them into his body and break into his grotto heaven, he wouldn't be able to resist. However, the current situation didn't allow them to refuse. He gritted his teeth and knelt down, his head on the ground. "I am willing to listen to Jinren Peng's punishment." When the other 5 saw this, they had no choice but to kneel down and agree. Only then did Jinren Peng's expression soften. He turned to look at Zhang Yan and said with a smile, "This time, Hall Master Du Zhen went through a lot of trouble to find these true treasures. The sect can't not repay you. Why don't you choose 3 of them? They can be used as Tao protectors." Chapter 948. Zhang Yan thought for a while and looked at the treasures one by one. Out of these 6 treasures, 4 could be used in battles. As for the remaining 2, they were used to build a cave and refine Xian Qi. While they weren't bad, they weren't his first choice. Out of all of them, he was most interested in the 3-treasure phase bead. Normally, this treasure only needed blood to be injected and refined. Then, it could transform into one's own form and aura during battle. If one didn't care about the price, one could use techniques for a short period of time. That way, during battle, one could use it to make many different moves. As for the second treasure, he was interested in the Beast Foot Lamp. This treasure was called the Pi Beast Lamp and it could absorb spiritual energy from heaven and earth. When he fought with Yan Changxing, this treasure was immediately taken away by him. But that was because he had cultivated the 5 elements escape art and was not afraid of being trapped. Moreover, he just so happened to have the 5 elements mystic light, a divine art that could restrain it. If it was someone else, it wouldn't be so easy to deal with. Therefore, he could use this treasure. As for the 3rd treasure, because there were 2 treasures that caught his eye at the same time, it was hard for him to choose. One of them was called the Peace Prayer Scroll. It could be called a defensive treasure. It could turn into a scroll that was 10,000 miles long. It could cover the sky and the earth and block the invasion of external energy. Before, when he fought, it was the only treasure that voluntarily came out to help Yan Changxing. As for the other one, it was the Moon Crossing Raft. This treasure could allow him to travel beyond the 9 heavens and it didn't require much energy. After weighing the pros and cons, he decided to choose the Moon Crossing Raft. It wasn't that the defensive treasure wasn't good. It was just that, relatively speaking, when he was fighting an enemy, the raft had more room to advance and retreat. In the void, there were many treasures that were hard to find. There were even some treasures left behind by powerful cultivators. He was different from others. Heaven and earth was a spiritual cave. He didn't need to guard his home like other enlightened beings. With this item, he could travel through the void. He could also borrow the poisonous fire and wind to train his body and improve his cultivation. Also, after this battle, he wouldn't go out to fight in the near future in case others found out about him. Therefore, he was going to study the 5 refinement technique of strength. If he succeeds, defensive treasures will be useless. After making his choice, he swept his gaze over the 3 true spirits. Are you all willing to come with me? The middle-aged Confucian scholar was the most perceptive and knew how to read people's expressions. He immediately knelt down and kowtowed, expressing his loyalty. This lowly one is willing to follow Master, willing to follow Master. This lowly one will do whatever Master says. If I sincerely disobey, even the heavens will not tolerate me. The other 2 true spirits saw this. They looked at each other and bowed silently. Zhang Yan raised his finger and knocked 3 times, releasing 3 restrictive talismans. The middle-aged Confucian scholar swallowed it without hesitation. The other 2 hesitated for a moment before doing the same. Zhang Yan used his transcendence energy to refine them again. After about a quarter of an hour, the 3 of them shuddered. They felt as if there was an additional object in their spiritual bodies. They knew that from today onwards, their lives were truly in the hands of someone else. A single thought from the other party could determine their life and death. At this point, they had to accept their fate. They knelt down and said, "Greetings, Master." Zhang Yan smiled. He raised his sleeve and waved it gently. A cluster of spiritual light sprinkled down like water, covering the hall in an instant. When it was collected, the 3 treasures and their true spirits were gone. He then stood up and bowed. "Thank you, sect leader, for the treasures." Sect leader Qin smiled. He raised his hand and gestured. "Hall Master Du Zhen, please sit." Zhang Yan bowed slightly and sat down again. He said, "There is one more thing that I need to report to Sect Master. When Jinren Yen passed away, he left behind a technique in the sect. He said that if we cultivators learn it, we will be able to sense spiritual vigor like a nerve. I think that this technique can be used for reference by the people of the same generation in the sect. Maybe it can increase our strength." Sect leader Qin stroked his beard. In terms of talent, the few of us can't compare to senior brother Yen. However, senior brother doesn't care if he can achieve immortality. He only cares about repaying kindness and enmity. He's free and unfettered in the world. That's his temperament. In the end, it harmed him. He pondered for a moment before saying, "Senior brother Yen killed many disciples in the sect. It's not appropriate to let this matter be known. Hall Master Du Zhen, you can visit him first. When you're familiar with him, we'll temporarily pass on the name of Hall Master Du Zhen. After we ascend, we'll clear senior brother Yan's name." Zhang Yan thought about it and nodded. Disciple will obey sect leader's order. He knew that sect leader Qin and Lu Junyang would have something to talk about. After exchanging a few more words, he stood up and took his leave. At this moment, outside, Lu Junyang was sitting cross-legged on the ground with a calm expression. Jiao Yuanliang was pacing around with a frown. He looked very uneasy. Lu Junyang looked at him and said, "Junior brother, don't be impatient." Jiao Yuanliang sighed and said, "I thought that after returning to the sect, I would have a place to settle down. My disciples would also have a place to go in the future. They wouldn't have to live outside like me. I didn't expect that there would be such a big enemy in this Qinsong school. Senior brother, how could I dare to call them here?" Lu Junyang said, "Jinren Peng is Jinren Dongtian. It's understandable for him to make things difficult for you and me, but he won't lower himself to make things difficult for a few juniors." Jiao Yuanliang smiled bitterly and said, "Even if he doesn't think about it, I'm afraid that his disciples will take the initiative to stand up for me." Lu Junyang raised his head and looked at him calmly. He said, "Then junior brother should cultivate well. The deeper our cultivation, the more people won't dare to act rashly. Even if there's a mishap, when you and I have the ability, if there's a grudge, we can solve it ourselves. There's no need to beg others. When Jiao Yuanliang heard this, he was stunned. He lowered his head and thought for a while. He cupped his hands and said seriously, "Senior brother, what you said makes sense. I understand." As the two were talking, a ray of light suddenly appeared outside the floating heavenly palace. It turned in the sky and landed on the empty space outside the palace. When the light dispersed, a handsome young Taoist came out. He was stunned when he saw the two of them sitting in front of the palace steps. Perhaps it was because the two of them had a high cultivation level. He came forward and bowed. He said, "Taoist brothers, please come in." Lu Junyang straightened his clothes and returned the bow. "Greetings, Taoist brother." The young Taoist said, "I'm Zhou Xian. I'm a disciple of Xianshui Palace's Master Qi. Both of you look unfamiliar. May I know where you usually cultivate?" After sect leader Qin opened the Golden Pavilion's treasury, because he was Qi Yuntian's disciple, he also benefited from it. He often came to the floating heavenly palace to read the scriptures. However, those who could come to this place were all people with a strong background. He was sure that he had never seen these two people before, so he had some doubts. Lu Junyang had always been magnanimous. Although he had heard about Jinren Peng after he entered the sect, he had no intention of hiding his master. He was about to reply when Jiao Yuanliang was anxious. He stepped forward and said, "Both of us followed Jinren Zhang to this place." "Oh, so you followed Hall Master Du Jin here." Although Zhou Xian knew that he must be hiding something, since he was related to Zhang Yan, he was afraid that he would encounter something that he should not know. Therefore, he did not dare to get to the bottom of it. After chatting with the two of them for a while, he cupped his hands and left. Jiao Yuanliang was envious and jealous as he watched him leave. He thought, "My honored master was the eldest disciple of the previous generation of Qinsong school. If it wasn't for the incident that year, the position of the sect leader would have been him. This Xianshui Palace should also be the place where my senior apprentice brother lives, right?" After Zhou Xian left, he suddenly thought of something. He stopped and thought. Jinren Zhang went to the Middle Pillar State to find that fierce person to settle his past grievances. Could it be that these two people are that person's disciples? I heard that that person has a disciple named Lu Junyang. He is very good. Looking at the young man in white robe, he is similar to the rumors. What are they doing here? Combining the things that happened before and after, he vaguely guessed a few possibilities. His expression changed. He walked around and said to himself, "If that's the case, I can try to make friends with them. Who knows, I might be able to rely on them in the future." After Zhang Yan left the floating heavenly palace, he turned back to the hall of Dujin. Once he entered the Xuanzisi realm, he silently checked with his palm. Seeing that Lu Yenyi and Tian Kuan were meditating and unaware, he retracted his gaze and leaped into the sky. In a flash, he stepped into the main hall. A few cloud dragons sensed that the master of this place had returned. They unconsciously came over and swayed their tails. They swam around him as if they were asking for credit. He smiled and raised his hand to send some essence over. These cloud dragons were refined by the seniors of the sect by combining the essence of the Jiao dragon with the mighty heroes. Usually, they were only used to guard the hall. There were about 100 of them. With the help of the main hall's prohibition, they would not be weaker than ordinary grotto heaven cultivators. However, if they were to go outside, they would not be able to do so without the support of spiritual vigor and essence. After comforting these cloud dragons and ordering them to guard, Zhang Yan went to the jade platform and sat down. He closed his eyes and regulated his qi. The pillars around him rotated slowly and continuously guided the spiritual vigor of the spirit cave into his body. About 10 days later, the original vitality and essence that he had used in the previous battle were fully replenished. Not only that, he could faintly feel that his cultivation experience had improved a little. He did not find it strange. In Xinchang's book, when a grotto heaven cultivator first entered the realm, if he could replenish his essence after every battle, his cultivation experience would more or less improve. However, after a few times, there would not be such a good thing. He would need to train himself step by step. He pondered for a while and took out a talisman from his sleeve. This was given to him by Yen Changxing before he passed away. With this talisman, he could enter the grotto heaven. Other than the storage of the Dan Jade, there was also the extremely important martial technique. Hence, he planned to enter and retrieve it. He raised his finger and tapped on the talisman. He injected mana into it. After a few breaths, there was a dazzling light flowing on the talisman. Then it became wider and wider. Gradually, a screen of light appeared. He looked over and stared at it for a while. Looking at the situation, it was similar to when he entered the small world. However, in this kind of heavenly passage, the cultivators would always set up some measures to prevent the invasion of outsiders. Although with Yen Changxing's temperament, he would not do such a thing secretly, he was still particularly careful. He did not personally go in, but instead took a drop of essence blood and condensed it into an avatar. Then, with a light push, a gentle wind arose, and it was sent in. Chapter 949. Just as Zhang Yan's avatar was about to enter the light screen, he felt a gentle force pushing him out. He was surprised. He checked for a moment and realized that someone had set up a barrier. If an outsider's magic power was slightly stronger, it would be hard for them to enter. With his cultivation, it wasn't difficult for him to use his mana to forcefully disperse it. It's just that there were secret manuals of techniques he wanted to retrieve stored here, as well as quite a number of pill jades. If he used too much force and destroyed some of the arrangements, it wouldn't be good. With a thought, he stretched out his hand and took back a thread of essence chi from the clone. This clone was originally maintained at the second stage of strength-changing realm, which was equivalent to a Xian light realm cultivator. Now that he used it, his cultivation dropped and he could only be compared to a light chi realm cultivator. However, even so, he still couldn't do it. There seemed to be another layer of obstruction. He thought for a moment and thought to himself, could it be because of the soul? Thinking about it, it was possible. A grotto heaven was like their backyard to a divinity realm cultivator. Unless they were forcefully barged in, they wouldn't allow outsiders to peek in. Others might find it difficult to deal with it, or they might slowly resolve it. However, it was easy for him to deal with it. He extended a finger and hid a wisp of his spirit in the doppelganger, no longer actively controlling it like before. It was just like when he visited the Donglai continent. However, it was different from back then. Now that his cultivation was profound, he could see every single action of his avatar. If necessary, he could even replace it. After doing this, he tried again. As expected, there were no more obstructions in front of him. With a chuckle, Zhang Xian waved his sleeve, and his clone floated into the small world. After the clone entered, it was in a daze. When it woke up and could see again, it realized that it had landed beside a river. He discovered that he had landed on the bank of a river. The surface of the river was very wide, and the waves were surging. The river flowed quickly and the terrain on both sides was uneven. It was vast. When it raised its head, it saw the blue sky. When it looked up, it saw the sun and moon. Further away, there seemed to be countless stars. Zhang Yan sat outside and saw this through the clone's eyes. He couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. The situation here was as good as being in another world. It didn't look like an ordinary cave, but more like a small world. When the cultivators of the grotto heaven entered the second realm, their cultivation was profound, and they had sufficient mana. They could try to open up a grotto heaven as a place to gather spiritual vigor and protect themselves. If he was not a match for someone in a fight, he could hide in there temporarily. As long as the spiritual opportunity in the grotto heaven was endless, he would be fine. However, there was a flaw. Opening the grotto heaven required a massive amount of spiritual opportunity, and if it was left unattended for a long time. If he absorbed too much spiritual vigor, it would definitely collapse and dissipate. If there was a chance in the future, he would need to expend a lot of effort to reopen it. However, a small world was different. Those who could open up a small world had to be at least a powerful cultivator who had ascended to the immortal ascension realm. They could transfer the spiritual energy of the mountains and rivers of the outside world into the small world. For example, the original residence of the Duchen sect, the Xianlu continent, had been established by the joint efforts of several cultivators from beyond the heavens. They had also extracted earth qi and placed it inside. It also left behind living beings to multiply and multiply. It could truly be said to be a world of its own. Zhang Yan had been to a few grotto heavens created by his peers. Most of them were empty, with only a few constructed mountains and rivers. This was Sun Jinren, who loved to enjoy life the most. Other than a misty and hazy lake, there was nothing else. It was not that they did not want to build it, but their cultivation was not enough. Doing such things would only be a waste of spiritual opportunity. However, if there was a powerful talisman supporting the grotto heaven, then it would be a different story. Zhang Yan knew that Yan Changxing had already exhausted his vitality and qi. His Danyu also said that he would not move. Logically speaking, he would not have any energy left to make other arrangements in the grotto heaven. Therefore, he guessed that there might be some spiritual treasure that could suppress the grotto heaven. He became interested and paid more attention. After the split body stood still by the river, he looked around. In his memory, he was a disciple of the Qinsong, under the Zhaoyu sect. He came here under the orders of his master to look for a book of martial arts and some external items for cultivation. He sensed for a long time at the same spot. He realized that heaven and earth were filled with spiritual opportunity. There were a few directions that he sensed were especially strong. He decided to go to those places to take a look. He inhaled and a clear qi filled his body. He then soared into the sky and floated along the river. After traveling for an hour, he saw that there were houses that were built on both sides of the river. Zhang Yan saw it and his eyes flashed. This meant that there were living people living in this grotto heaven. However, in this grotto heaven, one more person to cultivate meant one more spiritual opportunity. If it was not a disciple, it would not be done so. However, looking at the situation, it was not Yan Changxing's disciple. Just as he was thinking, the split body traveled another 10 miles. He heard a faint singing coming from the front. The music was loud and it was high-spirited. He gazed into the distance and saw a lone boat drifting with the waves on the long river. A robust man with a curly beard stood on the boat. He was tall and broad, had a sword at his waist, and held a wine gourd in his hand. He sang as he drank, and he seemed extremely heroic. As he got closer, the man saw him floating over. He was surprised and said loudly, "I'm so lucky to be able to meet a celestial today." He raised the wine gourd in his hand and patted it. He said, "There's good wine here. It's not as good as celestial brew, but it's strong enough. If you don't mind, why don't you come and drink with me?" Dragon Lake Great Marsh, Carefree Ripple Island. This place was outside of the mystical Water True Palace. It was vast and was usually the place where the disciples of the palace master gathered. The current palace master, Qi Yuntian, only took in Zhou Xian as his disciple in name. Hence, this place became the place where he usually cultivated. Today, Zhou Xian held a banquet on the island. The person he invited was not a cultivator of the same generation, but a Taoist boy who was on duty in the floating palace. This Taoist boy's Taoist name was Wan Ming. Although he was on duty in the Heaven Palace, he did not have much cultivation. Usually, he could only walk in the spiritual eye by relying on talismans. He knew that the next sect master would be Qi Yuntian if there were no accidents. Even if Zhou Xian was his disciple in name, he would be the future sect master's disciple. Today, he saw that the Taoist boy was unusually polite to him as if he was a distinguished guest. He was flattered. Luckily, he did not lose his mind. He knew that there must be something going on. After a few cups of wine, he asked carefully, "Shenren, why are you calling me? Do you have any orders?" Zhou Xian laughed and said, "I won't hide it from you. I want to inquire about something. Half a month ago, after Hall Master Du Jin returned, were there 2 Jinren accompanying him?" Hearing this, Wan Ming's hands trembled. The Heaven Palace deacon had repeatedly warned them not to tell anyone about the 2 of them. He groaned in his heart. If he knew it was about this, he would not have come. He could only say, "This?" I don't know much about this. Why don't I go back and inquire about it? After saying that, he hurriedly got up as if he was going to escape. Zhou Xian sat still. He gently waved his hand and a manna suddenly came down and pressed on Wan Ming's shoulder. He said with a faint smile, "Little Taoist Wan Ming, why do you have to be like this? I don't think it's something too important. How could you not know?" Wan Ming scolded in his heart, "If it's not something important, is it worth it for you to treat me like this?" On the surface, he put on a pitiful expression and said, "It's not that I don't want to give face to Jinren Zhou. In fact, the deacon Jinren has taken care of me. Whoever dares to leak this information will be severely punished. Please don't make things difficult for me." Zhou Xian smiled and let go of his hand. He said slowly, "Even if you don't say it, I know. That is Lu Junyang, Jinren Lu, who is under Jinren Yan. The other person is also from the same sect. Am I right?" Wan Ming opened his mouth and said in a daze, "Since Jinren Zhou knows, why do you need to ask me?" At this time, Zhou Xian finally revealed his purpose. He said with a smile, "I won't hide it from you. I admire these two and want to get to know them. It's just that I don't know where they are staying, so I came to ask. I don't think you can hide this from me, right?" As he spoke, he took out a Taoist book from his sleeve and a white jade porcelain bottle. He placed them on the table and said, "In this book, there is a basic cultivation method and a few small techniques. In the bottle, there are some pills to replenish qi and strengthen the body. They are not good things and are useless to me. How about I give them to you?" Wan Ming stole a glance. He knew that the other party said it was not good things, but if he listened to it the other way around, it must be good. He unconsciously swallowed his saliva and was a little tempted. When he was on duty in the floating palace, all he saw were cultivators with profound cultivation. When they walked around, they were accompanied by clouds and rosy clouds. It was such a glorious and carefree life. He also hoped that one day he would be able to fly in the sky and travel the earth, living a happy life like an immortal. However, for children like him, other than those who were lucky enough to be taken in as disciples by the grotto heavens in the sect, most of them would be sent to manage the 9 courtyards when they grew older. And if they missed the age, even if they focused on Tao, they wouldn't be able to learn any proper skills. However, with this cultivation method in front of him, he might be able to step onto the path of Tao. However, he was still a little hesitant, but he still couldn't bear to part with the 2 items. After struggling for a while, he asked hesitantly, "Is Jinren only here for this?" Zhou Xian laughed and said, "Other than this, what else can I do?" Wan Ming gritted his teeth and cupped his hands. "It's fine if you want me to say it, but I have a request." Zhou Xian said, "That's easy. Little Taoist, please say it." Wan Ming said, "If I say it this time, I'll be in trouble. I wonder if Jinren can allow me to serve you when I leave the celestial palace in the future." Zhou Xian didn't answer immediately. His eyelids were lowered as if he was thinking. Wan Ming was nervous. This was a chance to reach the heavens in one step. If he succeeded, he would have the chance to become a disciple of the future sect master. He couldn't help but stare at it. Now, he was the one who was afraid that Zhou Xian wouldn't agree. Zhou Xian thought for a while and sighed, "Alright, if I don't do this, I'm afraid that little Taoist won't be at ease. I'll agree to it." Wan Ming was overjoyed. He immediately pushed the table aside and shouted, "Disciple greets Jinren." However, Zhou Xian waved his hand and used mana to stop him from bowing. He only said, "Wait." Wan Ming understood. He took a few steps forward and said in a low voice, "Jinren, the 2 distinguished guests didn't go anywhere else. They went to Farewell Peak." Zhou Xian was stunned. He knew about Farewell Peak. It was where the little cold world was located. No wonder he couldn't find out anything about it. He immediately frowned. Could it be that he had guessed wrongly? Did the sect find these 2 people not to deliberately train them, but to imprison them? Chapter 950. Zhang Yan's doppelganger heard the call from the man on the boat and landed on the boat. He didn't stand on ceremony and took a sip from the wine gourd. He commented, "It's really not a good wine. There are even some secret medicines added into it. It's not something ordinary people can drink. The man smiled. Immortal is right. My wine is strong. It's like poison to normal people. One sip will cause them to bleed from their 7 orifices, but if they know the way of luck, they won't have to fear it. The way of luck? The clone looked at him. You know the way of cultivation? The man laughed. How can I compare to you immortals? My way of luck was taught by the Qi Jin instructor in the county. It's just a normal method. Zhang Yan's clone asked a few more questions, only to find out that this was under the rule of the Yan dynasty. There were no demons, but bandits. It was just that the imperial court was powerless to control the counties after the princes fought for the throne 100 years ago. Thus, when the local tyrants became powerful, there would be a position of instructor, used in name to quell the bandits, command the troops, and fight against the imperial court. The person with the highest authority in the county would have a scarf on his head, hence he was called the Qi Jin instructor. Zhang Yan listened to the conversation between the two of them from the outside and was also amazed. Looking at this place, it seemed to be a country of its own. He immediately had a guess. Yan Changsheng clearly did not treat this place as a place of cultivation. Otherwise, he would not have allowed so many people to enter. The burly man clearly thought that the clone was an immortal who hadn't come to the mortal world for a long time. After explaining the matters of the mortal world, he found an opportunity to cup his fists and say, I am Tai Chongguang. May I ask how I should address this immortal? The clone also gave his name and said, My name is Zhang Fang. I'm just a Taoist cultivator, not an immortal. Tai Chongguang laughed. To be able to fly in the sky, in my eyes, you're an immortal. Zhang Fang was moved. He asked, Brother Tai, have you seen someone like me before? Tai Chongguang shook his head. I haven't, but there are rumors that Emperor Taizu was an immortal's disciple. His weapon was a high iron rui. He was invincible on the battlefield. I heard that it's still enshrined in the imperial ancestral temple. Zhang Fang thought, this person is most likely Zhenren Yan's disciple. Tai Chongguang saw that Zhang Fangzong was a celestial being, so he did not put on airs. Instead, he was very easy to talk to. He was also a man of character, so after they got to know each other, they started calling each other brothers. Whenever there was a question, he would answer it without holding back. This time, I came to the Gu province under the instructor's orders to pursue the thief 1/2 foot of gold. Although I caught up to him at the ferry crossing, it's a pity that the thief jumped into the river before he died. I only managed to cut off one of his arms. When I return, I'm afraid that the instructor will find an excuse to embezzle old Tai's reward. When he said this, he was very unhappy. Zhang Fang found out that this Tai Chongguang was also a military instructor, but he could only wear a blue scarf around his arm, so he was called the Blue Scarf Military Instructor. Usually, he was in charge of arresting robbers. Because of his straightforward personality, he often offended people. Every time there was a difficult case, the higher-ups would hand it over to him. Now that the case was over, he took the boat to the east and returned to his hometown, Pingbo Town, Hu County, Jiezhou. Zhang Fang saw that they were heading to the place where he sensed the spiritual opportunity, so he did not leave. He simply found an excuse and went along with them. The boat flowed along with the river. At noon, it turned from the river to a waterway. After traveling for another 10 miles, it made a turn along a small hill. In the blink of an eye, the boat sped up a little. At this moment, he suddenly felt a strong spiritual vigor nearby. He turned his head to take a look. In the middle of the river, there was a small island at the center of the river. On the island, there was a stone turtle looking up into the sky. He didn't know which stonemason had carved it, but it was really lifelike. There was even an offering table in front, and a few old men who looked like witches were burning incense and kowtowing. He was also surprised that the spiritual vigor was so strong. Previously, he could only sense a little bit of it. There must be something strange about this place. Perhaps the thing that he was looking for was here. Tai Chongguang saw that he was staring at the stone turtle and smiled. Brother Zhang, are you curious that someone is kowtowing to this stone turtle? Legend has it that there used to be a water demon here. Every July or August, a celestial turtle came and turned into a stone to suppress it. Since then, there has been no more water here. However, every year around this time, there will be a tide meeting in the village. The first thing is to worship the celestial turtle, to bless me with good weather and smoothed out journey. Other than this time, outsiders are not allowed to lie about it. Looking at the time, there are 3 more days until the tide meeting. If Brother Zhang is interested, I can bring you up for a tour. Zhang Fang pondered for a moment. If he wanted to find out what was going on, he would have to move the stone tortoise away. For fear of alerting others, he decided to come back at night to take a look. Therefore, he pretended to be very interested and agreed. After the boat went around River Heart Island, they went ashore at a ferry. Zhang Fang looked around and saw that this place was surrounded by mountains. It was shaped like a basin valley. Most of the houses were built along the mountains. Lanterns were hung in front of the houses. Boats came and went like a weave. Even though there were only about 1,000 households in this town, there were many merchants and it was a bustling place. He noticed that there was only a narrow waterway at both ends of the entrance. There was even a memorial archway with the words Yi Mei Guan written on it. If there was an invasion from outside, the waterway would be sealed and no one would be able to enter. He also saw some traces of prohibition formations, which confirmed his guess. Tai Chongguang came here, but he had to submit his task first. Knowing that Zhang Fang was not familiar with the Tao, he found a young man with the surname Yu to lead the way. This young man was very attentive. After finding an inn for him to stay in, he poured tea for him and rushed back and forth. After settling down, Zhang Fang also ordered a table of food and wine and called him up to eat and drink together. The young man with the surname Yu wolfed down the food and felt full. He wiped his mouth and asked with a passionate gaze, "Sir, you are also a coach?" Zhang Fang smiled. "Why do you think so?" The young man with the surname Yu had an expression that said, "You can't hide it from me," and said proudly, "Tai Tu is a famous blue scarf coach here." If it wasn't for his inability to flatter his superiors, he would have already become a red scarf coach in the county. Normally, there aren't many people who can convince him. Even when the officials come to the county, he doesn't try to curry favor with them. Isn't it because he looks down on them for not having any ability? But he calls you Brother Zhang, so you must be a coach too. Zhang Fang smiled. "If I was a coach, what do you think?" The young man knelt down and kowtowed. "Teacher, please accept me as your disciple." Zhang Fang was startled and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Before he could reply, a loud laugh came from outside. "Brother Zhang, don't bother with him. Whenever this kid sees someone capable, he will go forward to acknowledge them as his master. I don't know how many times this has happened." As he spoke, Tai Chongguang strode in and picked up the young man with the surname Yu. He stuffed a string of copper coins into his hands and said, "Go, go, go. Go buy some food and clothes for yourselves. Don't disturb my brother's drinking." The young man nimbly took the coins and stuffed them into his bosom. His mouth was unconvinced and said, "If you don't want to teach, then don't. At worst, I'll just go into the mountains and look for someone. I'll definitely find someone more capable than you, Tai Tu, unlike you who can't find a wife." Tai Chongguang's face darkened and he looked like he was going to hit him. The young man was so frightened that he shrank his head and ran out. He cursed a few times and then sat down. Zhang Fang smiled and asked, "I see that this young man's constitution isn't bad. Brother Tai, what's wrong? You don't like him?" Tai Chongguang shook his head and said, "What's so good about being a coach? He spends his days with bandits and weasels. This brat's parents and I are old acquaintances. It's a pity that they died early. This is the only child in the family. I still hope that he can continue the family line and live a peaceful life. Once he walks this path, there's no turning back." When Zhang Fang heard this, he didn't say anything more and only focused on drinking with him. Under his deliberate urging, Tai Chongguang quickly got drunk. He also pretended to be unable to stand it and found someone to carry him out and arrange a guest room for him. Then, he closed the door and sat on the bed to meditate. After a few hours, it was already late at night. Only then did he sit up on the bed and push the window to take a look. It was already pitch black outside. Only a few large red lanterns were lit. He took a deep breath and his body became light. Like a wisp of smoke, he flew out and headed straight for the island. Very quickly, he arrived there and landed in front of the stone tortoise. He looked at it a few times and stepped forward, pushing it with force. The tortoise swayed slightly. Immediately, he knew what was going on. He took out a spell and immediately, clear and turbid chi revolved around it and slowly moved it to the side. Once the stone tortoise was gone, spiritual vigor shot up to the sky. It was more than 10 times stronger than before. When it reached the sky, there was even a strong gust of wind that filled the ears. At the same time, Zhang Yan, who was sitting in the hall of Du Zhen, narrowed his eyes. He saw that after the spiritual vigor shot up, there was a chi dynamic that absorbed it. In just a moment, there was not a single drop left. He immediately noticed it. Seeing that it was about to disappear, he didn't hesitate and immediately summoned his own spirit to replace it. Then he soared into the sky and sucked the strange chi into his stomach. Almost as soon as he made his move, the restriction in the cave was also activated. In an instant, his clone was pushed out of the cave. Zhang Yan waited for the avatar to come out, then he stretched out his hand and took the strange chi. After a while, he understood everything and sighed, "So that's how it is. Sage Yen has put in a lot of effort." Initially, he thought that Jinren Yen wanted to imitate the 9 cities and bathe the people here in spiritual vigor so that he could choose a suitable disciple and teach them Tao techniques. Now that he looked at it, it was not the case. The number of people in this grotto heaven was not as many as he thought. From the beginning to the end, there were only about 100 people. The rest were just illusions that were condensed from mana and spiritual vigor. As there were many elixir jades hidden underground in the cave, they were constantly emitting spiritual vigor. That was how the illusions were maintained. They were like real people. Every day, they would go out to work, marry and have children. They would grow old and die. Even they might not be able to tell if it was real or fake. After the 100 real people talked to the illusions, there would be thoughts generated from time to time. They became more and more real. Naturally, they spread out and became illusions that spread all over the world. In reality, there was no Hu County, there was no Jie province, and there was no Great Yen dynasty. However, when people felt the chi, they would be led into the illusions with a thought. It was different from the ordinary illusions. It seemed real and fake at the same time. There was truth in the fake. If they thought it was real, then it was real. The outside world was also evolving into life, death, war and war. Of course, Jinren Yen did not spend so much effort to have fun. He was relying on these people to cultivate a strand of strange chi and then nurture a seed of thought. The reason for this was because the cultivation method left behind here was extremely difficult to learn. If a cultivator wanted to learn it, they would have to cultivate the sensory nerves. However, if they obtained this cultivation method, they would be able to skip this stage. As long as he refined it according to the incantation, and then infused his essence and spiritual vigor, he would be able to use it. Zhang Yan's eyesight was very good. He deduced that if this technique was used during a battle, not only would it disturb the senses of others, it could also create endless illusions when one's cultivation level was high. It was similar to some of the techniques of the Yuanshan sect. It was indeed a good supernatural power. However, although most of the people in the cave were fake, they were also evolving the wonders in one's heart. Therefore, what they experienced might not be fake. As he thought of this, his eyes became gloomy. About 3,000 years ago, north of Dong Huaqing River, wasn't the dynasty of the mortal world named Yen? And one of the people had a similar appearance to Jinren Yen. What he evolved might be the events of the past. R1152. Chapter 951. Zhang Yan also sighed. After many grotto heaven enlightened masters passed away, the residences they left behind didn't have any disciples to take care of them, or their disciples opened up another grotto heaven. They didn't have any spiritual opportunities to nourish themselves and couldn't last long. However, if the Yingtsang sect's disciples obtained the spiritual seed and refined it, they would be able to add a formidable technique to their sect. With this kind of benefit, he was sure that the sect leader would not give up on this heavenly passage and would only try to maintain it. Though Changxing Yen gave the technique to the sect, he also protected the grotto heaven that he opened. If LV Junyang could step into the elephant phase realm, he could naturally take it over and become a Dao protector during the human calamity. Zhang Yen smiled. From his point of view, though inheriting the legacy of the predecessors could save him a lot of trouble, it was still better to open up a grotto heaven himself. This way, he would be able to understand all the changes within and wouldn't be taken advantage of by the enemy during battle. His gaze moved down and looked at the spiritual seed in his hand. Once the grotto heaven was involved, the spiritual seed in his hand wouldn't be of much use. Therefore, he was prepared to use another method. He added some precious materials and refined it into a magical treasure. That way, when he fought with an enemy, as long as he released it, he would be able to create all kinds of illusions. He could also use it to sense all kinds of qi. Even though it could not compare to Yen Changxing's spiritual senses, it could still be considered a great help. However, this matter wasn't urgent. Before that, there were still a few things he had to do. First, he had to refine the 3 true treasures. Though he placed a talisman in the true spirit and controlled its life and death, he still needed to put in some effort to use it as he wished. He took out the 3 talismans and let them shine brightly as they floated in the hall. He took a few glances and activated his mana. He gently spat out a wisp of clear air and split it into 3. He put them into his bag. At the same time, he activated the jade seal and activated the array of the Hall of Crossing Truth. It stirred up thousands of spiritual opportunities to help him refine it. The 3 treasures shuddered in unison. The true spirits in the room sensed that he was refining it. They opened up their own consciousness and cooperated with him, not daring to go against him. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. At this moment, Zhang Yen looked again and saw that after being refined by him, the 3 true artifacts were glowing naturally, and there was even a faint glow of warmth beneath them. As he swept his gaze across, they all trembled slightly. He knew that this was a perfect place, so wherever his thoughts went, they would resonate with him. He was also satisfied. He withdrew his thoughts and each of them let out a clear cry, turning into a precious light and entering his sleeve. Now that he had obtained the 3 treasures, he needed to think about how to deal with the great calamity. Qingsong School's future opponent was still unknown. However, he had to be prepared to fight against the entire world. If he wanted to survive the great calamity, he had to improve himself with all his might. He had previously fought with Luo Mengzi. After facing off with Chu and Mi and then fighting with Yen Changxing, he knew that battles between Grotto Heaven cultivators were extremely dangerous. Killing a Grotto Heaven cultivator was extremely difficult. And this was only in a one-on-one situation. In the human tribulation, no one would care about such rules. In particular, the more famous a person was, the more attention he would attract. Cultivation was the foundation. Apart from that, he would need to focus on the offensive and defensive sides. Therefore, what he needed to solve was to push his corporeal body to the 5th stage of strength transformation. The reason why he didn't choose to defend was because of this. However, the 5th stage of strength transformation might cause a huge commotion. However, reaching the 5th stage of force transformation realm could cause a huge commotion. Although there were restrictions in the Hall of Truth, he couldn't go all out. But now that he had the moon-traversing flying raft, he could go beyond the layer of heaven. This way, he wouldn't have to worry about being detected by his peers. Time waits for no man. After coming up with a plan, he had the intention to move. However, he didn't know how long it would take for him to return. As the Hall Master of Duzhen, he had to inform the sect leader. Therefore, he took a pen and paper and wrote a letter. Just as he was about to use his mana to send it to the upper extreme hall, he thought for a moment and called Jingyu over. He instructed, "Take this letter and send it to the sect leader. Do you know the way?" Jingyu said, "Master, I have followed Jinren He there a few times before. I won't delay your matter." Zhang Yen nodded and said, "When you go, if the sect leader asks about Jinren He, you can answer him truthfully. If he doesn't ask, you don't have to say anything." Jing Yu's expression changed. He bowed and said, "I understand." Zhang Yen waved his sleeves and bowed to Jing Yu. He took the letter and left the hall. Zhang Yan reached into his sleeve and grabbed the jade medallion of the Hall of Truth Temple Lord. Focusing his energy on his eyes, he began to examine the cultivation bases of the two disciples. After a moment, he nodded and waved his finger, causing two talismans to appear. In the blink of an eye, they transformed into beams of spiritual light that shot into the immortal's cave. He thought about it again and realized that there was nothing urgent to deal with at the moment. Even if there was, he could deal with it after he returned. Hence, with a slight shake, his Dharmakaya turned into a wisp of smoke and floated away. In an instant he had returned to his own body. Then he stood up and walked out steadily. When he stood in front of the compass, he stretched out his hand and pressed on it. Suddenly, a ray of spiritual light shot up to the sky. Without a sound, it separated the 9 layers of clouds and revealed a smooth path that led to beyond the heavens. He waved his sleeves and threw the moon-crossing raft out. When the raft reached the outside world, he used his mana to activate it. It turned into 1,000 feet long and returned to its original appearance. On top, there was a pagoda and a jade pavilion. Below, there was a palace and a lush forest. 7 colors were used as decorations. 5 colors were painted: green in spring, red in summer, gold in autumn, and white in winter. There were birds singing and birds singing. Warm smoke covered the pagoda. Clouds surrounded the trees and a fragrant wind blew. Zhang Yan took a look. The owner of the flying raft was actually a female cultivator from an aristocratic family from thousands of years ago. She was an extremely beautiful woman who used to hang around with flowers. However, this scenery was not to his liking. With a thought, he produced a cloud of fog and wrapped it around the raft. After a while, there was only a 9-story pagoda standing tall on the raft. He nodded and flew up to the pagoda. When his feet landed, the raft shook and turned into a bright light. It soared into the sky, and in the blink of an eye, it was out of the sky. When he arrived, he looked around and saw that the void was vast and endless. Other than the sun and the moon, the stars in the distance were as small as rice grains. Looking at it from here, there were only twinkling lights. It was recorded in the ancient books in the Hall of Crossing Truth that when the cultivators of the West Continent felt that their spiritual vigor was waning, they went out of the sky to look for opportunities to see if there was a place to stay. However, most of the stars in the sky were barren places. There were no spiritual mountains or rivers. Even if there was spiritual vigor, it was mixed with strong poison. Even if it could be dissolved, it would consume a lot of energy. It was not worth it. Therefore, most of them returned without any success. However, there were a few who did not return. It was unknown whether they found a suitable place and settled down, or if their vitality was exhausted and they died outside. However, he did not roam around as he wished. There was a place to go. Because he was hurrying in the void, those with weaker cultivation would consume too much of their vitality. They could only turn back halfway and could not go further. Therefore, on that day, there were a few powerful cultivators who worked together to create a giant cauldron in the void called the Great Capacity Cauldron. It could be used by cultivators to rest their feet. Now that 20,000 years had passed, the object should still be there. If it was suitable, it would be a place for him to rest his feet. Zhang Yan told the real spirit of the flying raft in his mind and returned to the pagoda. He closed his eyes and meditated. The flying raft floated in the void. After a long time, he heard a call in his mind. "Master, we have reached the boundary of the earth." When he heard this, he opened his eyes and woke up from his meditative state. He did some calculations in his mind. A year had passed since he left the 9 continents. He got up and walked out of the pagoda. He looked around and saw a giant bronze cauldron floating in the void about a few thousand miles away. It was very big. If it was placed on the 9 continents, it would be at least the size of half a continent. At this moment, it was floating in the air. There were several thick chains tied to 5 bronze pillars. He knew that these were 5 spirit-stabilizing needles with magnetic force at both ends. They were refined by those powerful cultivators who harvested precious materials from the void. With them here, even if there was an external force, the treasured cauldron would not move to another place. After looking at it for a while, he put the flying raft into his sleeve and turned into a ray of light. He flew toward the cauldron. When he was about to get close, he felt an invisible obstacle in front of him. He was not surprised. He knew that it was a restriction on the outside of the cauldron. It was not that it was not set up to guard against cultivators like them. It was to prevent the poisonous fire from corroding the cauldron. He used a little force and crashed into it. There was a Tautai pattern on the cauldron. He entered through its mouth and landed in a large hall after a while. He looked up and down. The place was empty and quiet. Ever since the cultivators of the West Continent decided to fight with the Sky Demon and moved to the East Continent, they gathered their fellow cultivators everywhere. The cultivators in the void also returned. Since then, no one had come to this place for tens of thousands of years. At this moment, he sensed some spiritual opportunity coming from his right side. His heart moved and he moved over. Before long, he entered a side hall. He saw a Taoist sitting on the ground. The Taoist had a peaceful expression as if he was meditating. However, he could see that this was just a shell. There was no vitality inside. From the style of the robe, he should be a cultivator of the West Continent. He looked again and saw words in front of him. He walked forward and saw that it said, "There are 10 boxes of pill jade in the hall. If you need it, you can take it yourself. Don't forget to replenish it in the future." He moved his gaze downward and wrote, "Solitary swan bow his head." Zhang Yan subconsciously nodded. He knew that there was an unwritten rule here. The almighty cultivators who worked together to refine this cauldron had left behind many Dan jades here. If a cultivator came here and lost too much of their primordial essence qi, they could take some and use it. But no matter how much was used, they had to find a way to make up for it in the future. Just now, the spiritual opportunity that he felt should be the remaining pill jade. However, most of them had been lost in the past tens of thousands of years. Since it was left by the senior, he would not act rashly. Moreover, it was not that he did not come unprepared. Outside the heavens, he had to face the poisonous fire and strong wind. Even though he had the flying raft to protect him, and his cultivation was profound, but to prevent any accidents, he brought a lot of Duzhen Hall's Dan jades. He bowed to the Taoist body. He walked one round in the hall and set up a few restrictions. He sat down at the side and reached into his sleeve to take out the devil's slip. Chapter 952. In Zhang Yan's magic slip, after absorbing the remains of several sky demons, it was full of essence. If he had no worries and cultivated according to the cultivation method passed down by the demon treasury, it wouldn't be hard for him to break through the barrier and leap into the 5th realm of the divine contract. However, once he entered this realm, he would have to abandon himself and become one with the demon, which he didn't want to do. But if he gave up just like that, the cultivation method he cultivated before would be equivalent to giving up halfway. Hence, he wanted to find another way. With another flick of his sleeve, a black light flashed and a rumbling sound was heard. When the light dissipated, a large pavilion was erected in midair. It was 100 feet tall and had 6 floors. There were ferocious beasts climbing on the eaves and pillars. It was a terrifying sight to behold. He walked into the room, and at this moment his feet shook slightly. When he looked up again, the scenery around him seemed to have returned to the void, and in the 4 directions, there were 12 towering demon images, each of them shrouded in mist, unable to discern their true appearance. After looking at it coldly for a few times, he sat down cross-legged and continued to follow the usual routine. First, he refined the mystic blood with the divine ability, then he used the mortal incarnation technique to cut off the mystic blood's head, and finally, he condensed an external incarnation. At this step, he threw the magic slip into the middle of the eyebrows of the incarnation, and then he silently chanted the incantation, activating the essence qi. Under his guidance, his cultivation gradually rose, and not long after, he entered the 4th level of the strength path. But to raise one's cultivation like this, it could be said to be water without a source. If there was no essence qi to fill the body, it wouldn't take long before the technique would dissipate, and he would once again fall to the mortal realm. If it didn't have a use, it would just be a waste of essence qi. At this moment, he released it, but decided to use this incarnation to circulate his cultivation method. After it broke through to the 5th level, he would destroy its soul, and finally, like taking over a body, he would use the body for himself. But whether or not it would work, he still needed to try to know. He split out a part of his soul and sent it into the incarnation. With a slight urge, it stood up and walked to the south, standing in front of a demon image. After a short while, a brilliant light flew down from above. It entered the middle of the eyebrows. Just like before, he passed down a cultivation technique. After looking through it once, he realized that it was exactly the same as the last time, so he no longer hesitated. He willed it. The doppelganger immediately activated his chi according to the incantation. At the same time, the devil realm continuously sent over essence chi for him to absorb. When he was about to reach that step, the demonic avatar moved and seemed to look around. However, it completely ignored the avatar and looked towards where he was instead. In that instant, Zhang Yan felt a vast wave of consciousness resonate with his own soul, as if it was going to enter his own body if it went any further. His brows furrowed as he knew that something was wrong. He immediately had the avatar stop its cultivation, and as soon as it stopped, the devil statue stopped moving as well. His eyes flickered as he thought to himself, so that's how it is. He was clearly using his doppelganger to circulate his technique, but the demonic image still pointed directly at his real body. If it was before, he probably wouldn't know the reason behind this, but after he formed his own cave, he naturally understood the logic behind it. This was because the part of his soul that resided in his doppelganger lacked a root and didn't have a master. The so-called root here referred to a person's past and present, while the master referred to the true consciousness that was born after a person was born. This part of the soul came from his body, and its memories and consciousness were all created by him. It wasn't something he was born with. It was like a part of his limbs that didn't exist in the world alone. Therefore, once he activated his technique, the demon avatar would still merge with his real body. As for how to resolve this, he had his own solution. What he did before was to throw this part of the soul into the world and let it roll around in the mortal world. After a few lives or a dozen lives, it would be tainted by the impurities of the mortal world. Naturally, it wouldn't have anything to do with him. However, this method would take a long time. Also, as long as he paid attention to it with his spiritual sense or tried to calculate it, there would be an additional pull. All he could do was ignore it. If that was the case, how could he let this reincarnated body cultivate the contract of comprehending the divine? Although it wasn't that there was no solution, it undoubtedly required a lot of planning. However, after the battle with Yen Changsheng and obtaining the grotto heaven that he left behind, he had another option. He took out a spiritual seed from his sleeve. As long as there was enough spiritual vigor, this item could create an illusion and evolve into the mortal world. Then, he would throw that part of the soul into this place and let it reincarnate, so that it would give birth to its own consciousness. With a gentle guidance, the spiritual vigor from the spiritual seed was injected. Immediately, it evolved into a mystical chi and produced an illusion. The origin of this was the thoughts of the living people in Yen Changsheng's small world, and it was mixed with the spiritual chi. He looked over and saw a quiet valley first. There were men, women, old and young farming in it. Gradually, there were people who entered the mountains to collect herbs, and there were people who thought of selling in the county. The city was formed naturally, and the world followed the desires of the people and gradually expanded outwards. In the beginning, regardless of whether it was the people, birds, flowers, trees, mountains, or rivers, their faces were unclear. They were fragmented and disjointed. However, in the end, as more and more people were born, the 7 emotions and 6 desires in the spiritual seed were spread out, and the world gradually became clearer. It was like a splash ink landscape painting that was finally colored. It was no longer as erratic as before, as if it could dissipate at any time. At this point, Zhang Yan knew that there was no need for him to interfere anymore. He caught a part of the soul and the magic slip and threw it into the spiritual seed. After doing this, he went to the side and meditated, not going to watch any longer. As for when it would be completed, he had no way of guessing. He could only wait patiently. However, with the magic slip coming and going, and just now, the cultivation method of the contract of comprehending the divine was already connected. No matter how muddle-headed it was only a matter of time before it was targeted by the magic slip and led to this path. When that time came, he could make his move. There was only one concern. Once it combined with the demonic form and achieved something, it would no longer be its original self. It could very well break free and hurt its owner. However, he had already reached the heavenly abode realm. Not to mention the sun-embracing axe, he had 3 true weapons in his hands to protect him, so he was not afraid. Moreover, he had nothing to worry about in the heavenly abode. No matter how big the commotion was, no one in the 9 continents would be able to sense it. The illusory realm evolved like a dream. Only one night had passed in the outside world, but dozens of years had passed in this world. In the valley that Zhang Yan had observed before, the village of dozens of people had already become a mountain town with thousands of people. On this day, a couple in the town gave birth to a baby boy. He was born intelligent and was sent to school. He had a photographic memory and was extremely intelligent. His teachers were all very happy. When he was 15 years old, he passed the provincial exam and went to the capital to take the exam. When he arrived at the county town, he saw a lonely old man selling a donkey. He took pity on the old man and bought an old donkey with the money he used to buy a horse. At night, when he was staying at the inn, a thief saw his tender face and broke in through the window. Just as he was about to steal, the donkey screamed in the middle of the night and scared the thief away, saving his goods. The young man was ignorant and did not know why he failed the exam. He could only return to his hometown. Halfway through, he slept in the mountains and heard the cries of ghosts. Just as he was bewildered, he saw 10 odd people swarming in, saying that there were ghosts and spirits here and that they had received guidance from someone. They wanted him to solve a case. The young man was not afraid. The case was not complicated. Every time he solved a case, a ghost would come out and capture the criminal. They would either interrogate or sentence him, and he could not help but be amazed. When dawn came, everything was cleared. The ghosts kowtowed and thanked him. After this incident, the young man knew that there were ghosts and spirits in the world. From then on, he no longer had any desire for fame. After returning to his hometown, he led the old donkey everywhere to seek immortality. It was just that after that, he didn't encounter any more strange things in his life. 7 years later, he caught a cold on the road. Due to the lack of medicine, he died in a broken-down temple. As for the old donkey, he turned into a streak of light and flew away. After that, he went through several reincarnations. In every life, he was entangled with a strange item. After another 10 lives, he was infected with more and more, as if he was sinking into a dye vat. Finally, his connection with the main soul was cut off. At the same time, Zhang Yan had an inexplicable feeling. He opened his eyes and knew that the first step was completed. He calculated and realized that it had been 3 years since he started meditating. He looked around. At this moment, the strange qi was constantly being nurtured by the spiritual vigor of the elixir jade. It extended outwards and occupied a corner of the cauldron. It was obvious that the illusion was becoming more complete. At this moment, the spiritual vigor needed was increasing. However, it was obvious that he could not stop now. Otherwise, all his previous efforts would be wasted. Fortunately, he was from the Qinsong school's Duzhen Hall and had achieved Dao. He did not care much about the elixir jade. If it were someone else, even if they had the same wealth, they would not be willing to do so. However, if he could really succeed in the end, it would be worth it. He smiled and closed his eyes to meditate again. In the illusion, after a few reincarnations, the separated soul was born into an official's family. When he was born, he held a jade glaze in his hand. It was so bright that it could reflect the person. Since he was young, he lived in luxury and was surrounded by servants. When he was 18 years old, there was an incident in the court and his family was implicated. He was sent to prison. A few years later, he was pardoned and was able to see the light of day again. Because he had no skills, he could only write letters to make a living. He was hungry and full. When he was 30 years old, he married a prostitute and had a son. Although it was hard, they loved each other and helped each other in times of need. They were barely able to get by. Who knew that an epidemic would kill his wife and son? Since then, he was disheartened and had no more thoughts of living. When he was outside the city, he tied a rope to a tree and wanted to commit suicide. However, he was saved by a Taoist who persuaded him to enter the path of Tao with just a few words. He did not know if it was because of his extraordinary physique or because he had cut off all worldly thoughts, but after he entered the path of Tao, his journey was smooth. In just a short 60 years, he could fly between heaven and earth and control the rain and wind. Although immortals and mortals were different, there was no lack of battles. When his sect was attacked, he escaped alone. After cultivating for 100 years, he went to seek revenge. However, he was still no match for the enemy. The mana that he had painstakingly cultivated was destroyed. Before he died, he made a vow that if he could take revenge, he would be willing to fall into the path of evil forever. As soon as he made this wish, a ray of clear light suddenly descended and covered his soul. Then, it was cast towards the doppelganger and disappeared in an instant. After a few breaths, one of the demonic images suddenly collapsed and turned into thousands of light rays that merged into the doppelganger. At the same time, the whole great capacity cauldron seemed to feel it and also slightly trembled. Floating astronomy. Chapter 953. Zhang Yan was also alarmed at this moment. He calmly stood up and looked over. Around the avatar, demon flames surged out and covered the large cauldron in an instant. The scarlet-purple light lit up the void. Fortunately, he was not in the 9 continents. Otherwise, even with the protection of the Duzhen Hall, it would be hard to guarantee that no one would notice the commotion. However, even though this demon form was formed, it would not listen to him. He needed to use some methods to subdue it before he could use it. At this moment, the illusory world in the hall was affected by the external qi. It dispersed and turned into strands of strange qi that were about to disperse. Zhang Yan identified it and waved his hand again. He kept one strand of strange qi and had an epiphany. He knew everything about the avatar's life. Then he waved his sleeves and kept all the pill jades in the hall. Even the ones in the large cauldron were taken away to prevent them from being used by the other party. After waiting for several dozen breaths, the light burst like sparks and suddenly jumped outwards, revealing a 6-horned demon with a coiled head, 3 eyes, and 5 legs. Black dragons coiled around its arms, black smoke under its feet, and scarlet-purple flames coiled around its body. However, this appearance only flashed for a moment. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared and turned into the appearance of a young Taoist. This person was somewhat similar to him. His bones were like jade, his appearance was bright, his eyes were bright, and his skin was glowing. His body was surrounded by auspicious clouds, as if he was made of snow and jade. He had the appearance of a celestial. No matter how one looked at him, he was a Taoist master. Zhang Yan was not surprised. From the technique, he could see that the demon form changed according to his thoughts and did not care about its true appearance. However, it could be seen from this. At this moment, the strand of soul had not truly merged with the demon form. The human side still had the upper hand. That was why there was such a change. Otherwise, it would not care about the change in appearance. The avatar was still confused, but after a moment, his eyes became clear. He saw Zhang Yan standing far away and was a little surprised. Then, he noticed that the person in front of him had monstrous mana. It was the enemy he had seen earlier. He immediately became vigilant and asked in a deep voice, "Who are you? Where is this place?" Zhang Yan laughed and said, "Since you are me, I am you." This was where they came from. It's the other side again. Although the doppelganger had lived dozens of lives in the illusory realm, it was still able to survive. But to him, everything he had experienced in his life was real, and it was impossible for him to know the true origins of his family. Hearing those words, he frowned and said, "Nonsense." He could feel the boundless power within his body. It was as if he could flip the heavens and overturn the earth with just a light wave of his arms and legs. However, the more it was like this, the more he could feel that Zhang Yan was not ordinary. The surging mana that was as vast as the sea was extremely oppressive to him. Furthermore, looking at his face, it seemed that he was somewhat related to his family. Instinctively, he wanted to avoid it, so he took a step forward and flew out. Zhang Yan smiled and let him go, not stopping him. There was only one exit in this side hall. The moment the doppelganger reached the door, he was blocked by an invisible barrier and had to stop. He snorted, puffed out his chest, and blew out a breath in front of him. In that instant, it was like a surging river. With a loud rumble, the huge cauldron actually shook back and forth after being hit by this breath. Zhang Yan squinted his eyes slightly. A rank 5 body was indeed extraordinary. If he was in the land of the 9 continents, just this breath alone could sweep through the continents, topple mountains, and destroy countries. But even with such power, it still could not break through the layer of restriction he had set up. Although he did not attack many places, the arrangement was extremely ingenious, and it was almost connected to the cauldron. In other words, although all the external forces that came crashing into the restriction, they were all withstood by the treasured cauldron itself. One must know that this cauldron was refined by several ancient great cultivators. Even though no one had cared about it for tens of thousands of years, and the restrictions of the past had already disappeared, the foundation was still there. The cauldron was abnormally strong. How could it be broken so easily? But if it was a person who knew a little about restrictions, as long as he attacked the important parts, it would not be difficult to get out. But this doppelganger's consciousness had only entered Tao for 100 years, and did not understand the key points. Seeing that he could not break through the restriction, his expression darkened, and his body grew to a height of 10,000 feet, as big as a mountain, and with a fierce shout, he slammed into the cauldron. With a loud rumble, it was as if the world was collapsing. The power this time was even fiercer than the last time. If there were not 4 spirit-stabilizing needles outside the cauldron to support it, it would probably be flipped over. But even so, after trying several times, he still could not get out. He could not help but reveal a slightly anxious expression. At this moment, his mind was still thinking about how to go back and take revenge. Even though his supernatural powers came out of nowhere, he felt that his head was a little dizzy, and his consciousness was gradually becoming unclear. Moreover, the more he used his supernatural powers, the deeper he sank into it. Therefore, his heart was extremely uneasy, afraid that he would not know when he would lose consciousness, and he was anxious to get out of this place. After trying a few more times, he found that this method was not feasible anymore. He closed his eyes and meditated for a moment. When he opened his eyes again, his body shook and turned into 10,000 wisps of smoke. They floated around, as if they wanted to find a way out. But after looking for a long time, they could not find the way out. Therefore, he changed again. Every wisp of smoke turned into an iron-beaked bird with a wingspan of several feet. They had red eyes and red toes, white feathers and black heads. Their feathers were like copper coins. In an instant, there were tens of thousands of them. The air was filled with the sound of their wings flapping, and they all pounced on the cauldron to peck at it. When one of them was exhausted, the other would immediately follow, wave after wave, endlessly. The entire hall was filled with the sound of the bird pecking, as if it wanted to break a way out from the inside out. Zhang Yan saw this and raised his eyebrows. He thought to himself, so there is such a supernatural power. The technique that says that it is ever-changing is really not empty words. One must know that this doppelganger had just merged with the demonic form, and especially at this moment, it still maintained its consciousness. It could be assumed that there were many supernatural powers that it could not use, and yet it could already have such transformations. If it reached a higher level, who knows what other tricks it could have. Looking again, in just a short while, these birds had actually pecked out a big hole on the cauldron wall. It was still too early to say that there was a way out, but dripping water could wear a stone, and rope could cut wood. If this continued, as long as the opponent did not exhaust his strength, he would be able to escape sooner or later. Seeing this, he had to move. He stretched out his hand and pointed. Lightning flashed, and he used the little 5 elements devil-slaying divine thunder. Now that this supernatural power was being used by him, the moment it was released, the void shook, and the impact spread for thousands of miles. In the large cauldron, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled continuously. There was also a power that could ward off evil and slay devils. As long as the birds were hit by the lightning, they would immediately be smashed into pieces and turned into dust. The remaining few knew that it was not good, and after they cried out in unison, they turned into smoke and gathered together, once again turning into the appearance of the young Taoist. At this moment he was shocked and angry. He shouted angrily, and still raised his body to a height of 10,000 feet, and put his arm horizontally in front of him to block. In the next moment his entire arm was smashed into pieces, and flesh and blood flew everywhere. Even he leaned back and took a few steps back, but just now he stood still, and the broken arm grew out again. Fear appeared in his eyes, as if he was extremely afraid of the devil slaying divine thunder. He took a light breath, and with a ha, he spat out a red and purple flame, which blocked the attacking lightning outside. However, the lightning was endless, and after a few breaths, he was forced to retreat. Zhang Yan was expressionless. Taking advantage of the time when he was tired of dealing with the lightning, he unfolded his dharma, and the chaotic Xian Qi covered the sky and the earth, surrounding him from all directions. At this moment, the clone was shouting angrily, and he could no longer care about the consciousness invasion. He repeatedly used his mana, but this way, although the power of his every move was much stronger, his expression gradually became crazy. Zhang Yan's eyes were deep, and he saw this change in his eyes. After seeing the cultivation method, he understood that this was because the knot with the devil was getting deeper and deeper, and it was difficult to suppress his nature, and it was released. Although he looked crazy, at least there was still a trace of humanity left. If he reached the point where he completely merged with the devil, he was afraid that he would be completely obliterated and there would be no more self. Because the clone had lost his mind, he couldn't judge the situation of the battle at all. After fighting for another half an hour, the Xian Qi surrounded him. Seeing this, Zhang Yan made up his mind. At this point, no matter how it changed, it would be difficult to escape. Spiritual Master Dong Tian relied on the essence of his origin, and even though the body of strength was different, it had its own place to rely on. Being trapped inside, he could rely on his deep mana to slowly consume the vitality. Sure enough, for more than 10 days, the clone rushed left and right in the Xian Qi and used several magical powers, but he still couldn't kill his way out. Gradually, he showed signs of weakness, and there was no way to resist. Seeing that the time was right, Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. Right now, he just needed to go forward and kill the split soul in the demon body, and then he could take it for his own use. The reason why he dared to let the clone grow was because he had enough mana to suppress it, and he still had a backup plan, which was the demonic slip. Previously, he allowed it to hide in the body and didn't call it back. It was for this moment. With a thought, the demon-subduing slip suddenly exploded, and it released a green light. In an instant, it captured the split soul. The sudden change happened, and the clone's energy was exhausted, so he couldn't react at all. His body instantly froze. At the same time, a cold light flashed in Zhang Yan's eyes. He pointed out, and a spiritual light like a sword shot into the center of the clone's eyebrows. In an instant, the split soul was destroyed. With the loss of his soul and the absence of a ruler, his body naturally became an empty shell and fell from the sky. Zhang Yan tried to sense it again, but he frowned. Because of the demonic slip, he could see the changes in the clone's body from head to tail. When the demon invaded the body, there was a bit of demonic nature that tainted the soul. As time went on, it got deeper and deeper. Just now, after his slash, the soul was destroyed, and the demonic nature was destroyed. But at this moment, he could clearly feel that there was still a weak bit of demonic nature hidden in the body. Zhang Yan's mind changed. He was different from the clone, and he had the cultivation of grotto heaven. This bit of demonic nature was something that he could suppress with his mental fortitude. However, if he left it alone, it would be a hidden danger. He had to get rid of it before he could control it. In the world, if we talk about killing demons, My Qinsong school can be said to be number one. But in terms of killing demons, Huanzhen Temple is the best. When I go back, maybe I can go there and see if I can find a secret technique to suppress it. P.S. There's one more update, slightly later. Chapter 954. Zhang Yan stopped thinking and walked forward. When he reached the front of the avatar, he did not stop and continued to move forward. However, it was as if he had passed through an illusionary smoke. With a gentle shake of his shoulder, the avatar slowly entered his body and merged into one. He silently observed. Ever since he left the 9 continents and arrived beyond the heavens, it had been 10 years. Although he had obtained the body of strength path and achieved his goal, in the eyes of his peers outside the sect, after the battle with Yan Chongxing, he had used up a lot of his vitality. Now he should be recovering his vitality in the Duzhen Hall, so he wasn't in a hurry to return. Moreover, he still needed to familiarize himself with the various changes in the demon body. It wouldn't be as convenient when he was in the 9 continents. Although the Great Containment Cauldron was not damaged in the battle earlier, this large hall was already in a terrible state. A couple of large pillars were also on the verge of collapse. It was time to change to another hall. However, at this moment, he suddenly sensed that something was amiss. When he arrived, there was the remains of an ancient cultivator in the side chamber. The remains of such an ancient cultivator shouldn't have been innocently attacked. Therefore, before the battle, he casually sent it to the side chamber, so it wasn't damaged. However, it was originally facing the south, but at this moment, it was inexplicably facing a different direction. His eyes flashed. This place was in the void. If there was an outsider here, he would have noticed it immediately. If it wasn't from the outside, then it must be from the inside. He waved his sleeves forward and floated near the corpse. He glanced at it and instantly found something strange. There was a weak spiritual light in its chest. He reached out and an item appeared in his palm. Looking at it carefully, it was a crystal-clear jade spoon. It was only 6 inches long and was smooth and smooth. There was no flaw on its entire body. He used his spiritual sense to check it out and instantly knew what was going on. This jade spoon was actually a real treasure. Even though no one had refined it for 10,000 years, there was still a shred of true consciousness left in it. Just now, when he fought with the demon, he shook the cauldron and startled it. That was why the corpse moved. It only woke up for a short while. It dissipated on its own. However, at this moment, Zhang Yan sensed a familiar aura. He stretched out his hand and wisps of black smoke drifted out from between his fingers. He was certain. This was a magic treasure of the demonic path. But inside. However, there was one thing that he did not understand. Today's devil sect had 2 origins. One was from the Western continent's heterodox practitioners. Back then, they had entered the demon's cave to suppress the demon and then passed down their teachings. The Blood Soul sect and the other 4 sects had all come here because of this. As for the other one, it was passed down by cultivators from beyond the heavens. Only the Nether Spring sect was able to survive to this day and was still known to the world. However, more than 10,000 years ago, there was no Devil's Cave in the original Western continent. Naturally, there were no Devil's Sect techniques. This jade spoon might have come from another place. However, no matter how amazing this treasure was, once the true consciousness within it dissipated, it became an ordinary item. However, its texture was strange. Even Zhang Yan could not tell what kind of precious jade it was made from. After thinking about it, he decided to ignore it for now. When he returned to the Duzhen Hall, he would look through the books and see if he could find its origins. He shook his sleeve and put the treasure in. Then, he sat cross-legged on the ground and silently circulated his cultivation technique. East Hua Continent, Qinsong School, 10 Peaks Mountain. Originally, there was only a simple and crude cave abode on the mountain peak. It was a place for the 10 first seats to rest. However, after Chen Feng took over as the first seat, he had spent a great deal of effort to build several palaces on the mountain because he was originally from the Chen clan and loved to enjoy life. Not just him, he also built flying peaks and flowing rivers, pavilions and pavilions, and planted strange flowers and trees on the other peaks. After this round of repair, it was completely different from before. The original place where the disciples fought had become filled with flowers and was filled with spirit energy, causing it to seem like a paradise for cultivation. Seeing this, the other disciples also moved here to cultivate. It was also convenient for them to discuss and exchange knowledge. However, today, there would be a letter flying in the sky from time to time. Occasionally, there would be a whistle or two. Anyone could tell that something big must have happened. In front of a circular door in the palace, Chen Feng held the letter in his hand and read it carefully. However, his expression was very solemn. In a few years, it would be the day that the Devil's Den would appear. Blood Soul Zongxian knew that Qinsong wanted to stop him from entering the battle for the Devil's Denver. Therefore, he had been moving out frequently recently. The two sides had fought no less than 10 times. Fortunately, many of the elites in his sect had died in the previous battles. Now, he was really unwilling to fight against Qinsong. Every time he suffered a small setback, he would retreat in a hurry. However, there was news just now that numerous altars in the southwest had been breached, and an elder of the Chun clan that was originally standing on guard there had been killed. Moreover, the killer was the Nether Spring sect's elder, Lu Rongyang. Chen Feng put down the letter and frowned. Lu Rongyang's purpose for coming here was obvious. She definitely wanted to help the Blood Soul sect break through the siege. However, this person was not simple. He was an elder of the Nether Spring sect and had long cultivated to the 3rd stage. He was of the same generation as Bailey Qingyin in the past. Especially since he had a damaged true artifact, Bei Sansha, he was not easy to deal with. However, he was hesitant. Should he strengthen his defense or take the initiative to attack? As the head of the 10 great disciples, although he had the support of the aristocratic families, perfected cultivator Chen had passed away. There were not many people he could use. It had taken a lot of effort to trap the Blood Soul sect. Although a few managing elders of the Crossing Truth Hall had come, it was not the time to decide victory. He did not want to reveal his strength too early. Moreover, if he lost too many people in the battle, it was very likely that he would not be able to maintain the original siege. Then, he would not have the face to sit in this position anymore. However, it was not appropriate to ignore it. If he dealt with it passively, he would eventually reveal flaws. He thought about it but could not make up his mind. He sighed in his heart. From the outside, as the head, he only needed to give orders. However, it was not easy to actually sit in this position. Thinking back to the time when Zhang Yan did not have the support of a heavenly abode master, he was able to destroy 2 devil's caves in the end. While he was thinking, a servant said, "Master, Elder Shao of the Daylight Hall has come to visit." Chen Feng's expression changed. He stretched out his hand and said, "Invite him in." Not long after, he saw a Taoist with a long beard that reached his chest walk in. The Taoist smiled and bowed to him, saying, "Junior Brother Chen, I haven't seen you for a long time. I see that you are frowning. Is there something troubling you?" Chen Feng was an upright person and had always treated people he was familiar with sincerity. Therefore, he did not hide anything and said frankly, "There is indeed a problem. Since senior brother is here, you can help me." Xiao Sha smiled and pointed at him, "You are relying on me. Fine, tell me about it. If it is not difficult, I will help you." Chen Feng was overjoyed and quickly told him what happened. He cupped his hands and said, "Senior brother has always had an extraordinary understanding. May I ask what I should do?" Xiao Sha listened and thought for a while. In the end, he laughed and said with a deep meaning, "I think this is not a bad thing. Instead, it is a good thing." Chen Feng said, "What do you mean?" Xiao Sha's eyes flashed. He said, "Junior brother, let me ask you. Even if you killed a few Blood Soul sect disciples, what can you do?" He pointed in the direction of the floating heavenly palace and said, "Senior brother used to sit in this position just like you, but he's still not an elder? But he still can't be promoted. Junior brother, you must grasp this opportunity." Among the 3 halls of Qinsong School, other than the upper extreme hall, the Daylight Hall and Duzhen Hall's side hall masters had to have made great contributions and be the first seat of the top 10 disciples. Although Duda had been one of the 10 first seats, he had only been there for a short time. There was no chance for him to make any contributions. Therefore, when he went to the Daylight Hall, he was only an elder and not a side hall master. Chen Feng thought for a while and said, "I know what senior brother is saying, but I am not strong enough. Especially this time, I suspect that the Netherworld Spring sect has a backup plan. It is not that simple. Why don't senior brother come out and help me?" Xiao Sha was an elder of the Daylight Hall. His cultivation had reached the 3rd stage and he had many disciples under him. Especially since they were all from aristocratic families, if they could come out and help him, he could do many things that he did not dare to do. Xiao Sha said in surprise, "Didn't the Duzhen Hall send a few elders? Is it not enough?" Chen Feng said, "These elders are of high status. It is not good for me to order them around. Besides, that Lurong Yang is not easy to deal with. If I hurt them, it will be hard to explain to Hall Master Zhang. If he misunderstood that I did this on purpose, it would not be good." Xiao Sha thought for a while and nodded. He said, "That is true." He could understand Xinfeng's concerns. These elders were mostly disciples of the same master and disciple. They were also the managing elders of the Duzhen Hall in name. If there were many casualties, it would not be difficult for Zhang Yan, as the hall master of the Duzhen Hall, to cause some trouble for the aristocratic families. He stroked his beard and his eyes flickered. He said, "If that is the case, I can give junior brother an idea. Not only can it solve this problem, it can also remove a hidden danger." Chen Feng looked at him and said, "Senior brother, if you have something to say, please speak frankly." Xiao Sha said slowly, "Junior brother Chen, do you know that 10 years ago, there were 2 people who followed Hall Master Zhang back to the sect?" Chen Feng nodded. He said, "I know about this. Those 2 people are Yan's disciples." Xiao Sha said, "Although Yan is dead, the sect master is still generous to his disciples. On the surface, it looks like he is punishing them to suffer in the little cold realm. In fact, he is allowing them to cultivate in the sect. Let's not talk about Jiao Yuanliang, but Yuan Hongyang is very talented. He is very likely to become the Grotto Heaven Master." Chen Feng was slightly moved. He said, "Senior brother, you mean?" Xiao Sha smiled. He said, "Junior brother, you can go to the sect master and ask for these 2 people's help. Before this, Yuan Hongyang has followed Yan to cultivate. He has never done anything for the sect. It is not proper for him to cultivate in the sect. If there is such an opportunity to make a contribution, the sect master will definitely agree. If he is defeated, we can cut off his path to the Jin dynasty. If he wins, junior brother will have made a great contribution. In the future, it will not be difficult for you to become the master of the side hall." At this point, he said meaningfully, "Although senior brother Hua is 1 step ahead, junior brother, it is not impossible for you to catch up." Chapter 955. Inside the little cold world, thousands of miles of ice were sealed and gray clouds covered the sky. A ray of light flew out from the thick fog and arrived in front of a cliff that was covered in snow. As soon as the light landed on the ground, it dissipated like a bubble. Jiao Yuanliang walked out of it and muttered something. With a wave of his hand, a strong wind swept away all the snow on the mountaintop, revealing a stone door that was as tall as a person. He pushed the door open and walked in. With another wave of his sleeve, he closed the door and isolated the wind and snow outside. Then, he took out a bottle of Huanyang wine from his sleeve and placed it next to his mouth. He took a small sip and after a while, his body was filled with warmth. Outside, the 9 nether cold wind would blow every 12 hours. If one's cultivation was slightly weaker, they would freeze on the ground. Even though he was a Yuanying cultivator, after a long time, he would feel a trace of coldness seeping into his bones. Drinking this wine, not only could it get rid of the coldness, it could also relieve his worries. However, there was very little of this wine. It was given to him by the Taoist who guarded the door before he entered the little cold world. From then on, he could only get 1 bottle every year. He was not willing to drink more. After a few sips, he kept the wine bottle and took out a silk handkerchief to wipe the corner of his mouth. After cleaning up, he walked into the depths of the cave. After walking for a short distance, he exited the tunnel. The top of his head opened up. At this moment, he was standing in a cave on a cliff. A few steps forward, there was a deep ravine. A rope bridge was built on top of a cliff 100 steps away from the other side. He was not in a hurry to go over. Instead, he took out a handful of red jade fruits from his sleeve. There were about 10 of them and he threw them out. In the stream below, there was a splash. The jade wave-flying sword leaped out from the long stream. It sucked and swallowed all of the fruits. Then, it waved its tail at him 3 times and fell back into the water. Behind him, there was only a splash of icy mist. Only then did Zhao Yuanliang dare to go over. With a flick of his sleeve, he rode the wind and arrived at the other end of the pier in a flash. He also found a cave door and quickly walked in, arriving at a hall in the cave. From bottom to top, this hall was about 100 feet high. It was very spacious. In the middle, there were several stone platforms that could accommodate 1,000 people. The shattered rocks around them formed a staircase. Along the way, there were lit candles on both sides, and every 10 steps up, there would be a deep niche on the stone wall, with a skeleton sitting in it. There were many jade slips on the table. He tapped the ground. He flew into the air. At the highest point of the stone platform, a young Taoist dressed in a plain robe sat on the stone platform. His clothes were spotless. At this moment, he was carefully examining the jade slip. Zhao Yuanliang walked over and asked in confusion. Most of these jade slips were written by core formation cultivators before they died. With senior Marshall Brothers cultivation level, what's the use of reading them? LV Junyang sat up straight and looked straight at him. He said, "Great enlightenment can only be obtained between life and death. This is something that cannot be found in ordinary Taoist books. Junior brother, if you have the time, why don't you take a look? Perhaps you will gain something from it." When Zhao Yuanliang's eyes met his, at that moment, there seemed to be a flash of light. He couldn't help but be shocked. When he looked again, it was still the same as before, as if just now was just an illusion. He thought to himself, looks like senior Marshall Brothers cultivation has improved again. Could it be that studying these incomplete jade slips is really useful? He casually picked one up, and he only took a few glances before disdain arose in his heart. Even though these were comprehensions before his death, as far as he was concerned, they were too shallow and not worth mentioning at all. He shook his head and tossed them aside, and then he went to sit down at the side and closed his eyes to meditate. Soon more than 10 days passed. He opened his eyes and saw that LV Junyang was still there. His posture had not changed, as if only a moment had passed. He laid down and took out the wine. He gulped down a few mouthfuls. Seeing that it was almost empty, he quickly closed it but felt that it was not enough to satisfy his craving. He couldn't help but sigh. Usually, he could only drink alone. He didn't like wine, but after holding it in for so long, he felt that he was about to become a drunkard. He raised his head and looked at the big incense above. When it finished burning, he would have to go out on patrol again. He suddenly felt a stuffiness in his chest and complained, "Other than us 2 brothers, no one else has come here in recent years. There is also that cold dragon outside. Even if a 3rd stage realm cultivator came here, he wouldn't have a good time. I don't know what's so good about guarding it." LV Junyang was calm and said, "Cultivation is everywhere. Sect leader has taken care of the 2 of us. There won't be any outsiders to disturb us here, so we can cultivate in peace." Zhao Yuanliang snorted and asked casually, "Senior Marshall brother, do you know who is imprisoned in the depths of the world?" LV Junyang replied, "Master once mentioned that he is from the same generation as Master." Zhao Yuanliang was instantly motivated. He flipped over and sat up. "What is his name?" LV Junyang looked over and said, "Junior Marshall brother doesn't need to ask anymore. If you have the time, you might as well focus on cultivating." Zhao Yuanliang felt bored and drank another mouthful of wine. He thought to himself, "I don't know how my disciples are doing. That spiritual master Zhou who came here last time said he was willing to help, but after all he was just a nodding acquaintance. He might not have said it out of politeness. Just as he was thinking, his expression changed. He turned around and saw a waterfall rushing down, crashing into a stone drum below the stone platform. Instantly, the sound of the air shaking rang out. His eyes widened and he said, "There's a visitor outside." He suddenly stood up and said, "I don't know who has come here. Senior Marshal Brother, stay here. I will go out and take a look." LV Junyang said, "Junior Marshal Brother, be careful." Jiao Yuanliang smiled and said, "Didn't Senior Marshal Brother say that there are no outside enemies here? If the visitor really has bad intentions, I can't ask for more. I can fight and stretch my muscles." He flew out and soon arrived at the door. He opened the stone and saw a tall and handsome young Taoist standing in front of the door. He looked up and down and couldn't help but say in surprise, "Spiritual Master Zhou?" Zhou Xian smiled and bowed, "Greetings, Taoist Jiao." Jiao Yuanliang quickly returned the greeting and said, "The 9 nether cold wind is outside. Taoist Zhou, please come in for a chat." Zhou Xian was a disciple of Qi Yuntian. According to seniority, Zhou Xian was 2 generations higher than him. However, he naturally wouldn't take this seriously and only treated him as an equal. Zhou Xian didn't stand on ceremony and followed him in after saying that he had disturbed him. When they returned to the cave hall, Zhou Xian saw LV Junyang and took the initiative to bow, "Spiritual Master Lu." LV Junyang's expression was indifferent and he only nodded at him. Jiao Yuanliang smiled and said, "This senior martial brother of mine only cares about Tao. Other than cultivation he doesn't care about anything else. Don't blame him, Taoist Zhou." Zhou Xian hurriedly said, "You're too kind." Jiao Yuanliang invited him to sit down and took out a wine set. He poured 2 cups of wine and said, "I don't have anything good to serve here, so I can only treat you with wine." Zhou Xian smiled and said, "I know that this place is poor, so I specially brought delicious food here." With a wave of his sleeve, a stream of clear water gushed out, flowing gently. It looked as if it had been carefully cut, only 3 feet wide, not the slightest bit overflowing. After making a few turns on the rock, the stream of water flowed out of it. Many delicious dishes were carried by the lotus leaves and floated out. It circled around in the stream, and in an instant, the entire room was filled with a fragrant aroma. Jiao Yuanliang heard a splash and several carps jumped out, carrying a plate of delicious food in front of him. He couldn't help but smile. Interesting. He was about to raise his chopsticks. Zhou Xian reached out to stop him. He smiled and said, "Slow down, there's no need for you to do it yourself." He took out a scroll and opened it with both hands. With a light shake, numerous beautiful girls walked down from the scroll. They laughed and talked, fragrance wafted around them. They fought to serve wine and tea to the 2 of them, massaging their shoulders and legs. There were even some who went outside to sing and dance, playing flutes and zither. Jiao Yuanliang let out a loud laugh. He raised his cup and said, "Brother Zhou, I'm indebted to you. We don't know anyone in the sect, so we're like prisoners guarding this small world. Thank you for coming to visit us." Zhou Xian raised his cup and drank, smiling. Taoist Jiao is too polite. When he put it down, he seemed to remember something and smacked his forehead. "I nearly forgot. Previously, I was entrusted by fellow Taoist Jiao, so I personally went to the Central Pillar continent and found a few of your disciples. Everything is fine and they are currently cultivating on my island." When Jiao Yuanliang heard that, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. When he was cultivating under Yan Changxing, he had offended many Middle Pillar cultivators. Now that his master wasn't here and he left his disciples behind, he was afraid that they would take revenge on him. However, after entering Qinsong school and knowing that there were enemies here, he didn't even dare to send a letter back. Now that he knew that everything was fine, he was relieved. He put on a serious expression and cupped his hands. "Thank you, Taoist Zhou, please accept my bow." Zhou Xian quickly went forward to support him, saying, "We hit it off the moment we met and saw each other as friends, so there's no need to be so courteous." Jiao Yuanliang laughed and said, "You're right. Come, let's drink." The two drank for the whole night. When they were done, Zhou Xian kept the scroll and said in a deep voice, "Before I came here today, I heard about something. I hope the two of you can be prepared." Jiao Yuanliang was shocked when he saw how serious he was. He sat up straight and said, "What happened?" LV Juanyang's expression didn't change, he just looked at him. Zhou Xian said, "The two of you should know that the demon's cave will appear in a few years." Jiao Yuanliang said, "I heard about it when I was in Middle Pillar Continent. What does it have to do with us?" Zhou Xian said, "The top 10 disciples today is Chen Feng. He is a disciple of Qin clan. Yesterday, he went to Floating Heavenly Palace and requested for the two of you to help him in battle. I heard that the sect master has already agreed." Jiao Yuanliang was startled at first, then he stood up and said excitedly, "There's such a thing? Does that mean we can go out?" He had been trapped here for 10 years. Although the small cold world was vast, it was covered with cold wind and snow. It was extremely cold, and to him, it was like a prison. If he could get out, he would be willing to fight with the disciples of the devil's doctrine. Zhou Xian shook his head and sighed, "Brother Jiao, don't be careless. I heard that the reason why the two of you are needed is to deal with a third-stage cultivator from the Netherworld Spring sect. This is a malicious move." LV Junyang put down the bamboo scroll in his hand and said, "I have seen a few people of this generation from the Netherworld Spring sect. I wonder who it is?" Zhou Xian said, "This person is called Lirongyang. Have you heard of her?" LV Junyang nodded and didn't ask any more questions. He still held the bamboo scroll in his hand and read it carefully. Zhou Xian looked at the two of them and said, "It's better for the two of you to be careful. I have been out for a night. I still have some matters to attend to, so I will take my leave now." Jiao Yuanliang said, "Let me send you off." Zhou Xian hurriedly said a few polite words. After he came out of the little cold world, he thought to himself, "That spiritual master LV is indeed extraordinary. I only hope that today's favor will be useful in the future." He put in so much effort because he was optimistic that LV Junyang could become a cave in the future. If he did good to LV Junyang now, when his disciples fought for the position of the top 10 disciples in the future, he might be able to get LV Junyang's help. He looked back and shouted. Then, he turned into a ray of spiritual light and went back to the cave residence smugly. They are tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.